The story begins with a little girl with orange hair waking up in a luxurious room, only to find herself lying in a small cradle. She slowly opens and closes her eyes, then gazes at her tiny hands and sock-clad feet, lying there filled with wonder and astonishment. She stands up in the cradle and observes her reflection in a large, ornate mirror, surprised to see she has become a young child with big blue eyes. As warm sunlight fills the room, a strong sense of shock washes over her, her face filled with terror as she realizes she has once again returned to the past. Everything had returned to the beginning, to the start initiated by an oracle. In a grand hall, a prophecy was made public. A child born on February 29th, capable of awakening the power of the Almighty God, would be the savior to save the world. Following this revelation, the imperial family and the Holy See began a tireless search for the chosen one. Their search took them everywhere, from lavish palaces to public squares, and eventually, they found the child believed to be destined. That child was none other than the protagonist of the story herself, confirmed due to her birth on the specific date and her possession of divine power. By order of the imperial family, she was adopted by a noble family and began a new life. Meanwhile, the temple was tasked with teaching and training her to use her so-called power. Despite being under close watch, her divine power showed no change or progress, disappointing everyone, while she herself longed for even the slightest improvement. Ultimately, she failed to awaken the sacred inscription everyone had been waiting for. As the temple and the imperial family abandoned her, she fell into despair, finding herself alone to face a dark fate. In the midst of this despair, another girl appeared, the true child of destiny. With the appearance of the real child, she realized she was just an imposter. She was accused of deceit and delusion, condemned by everyone, and ultimately died as a sacrifice to seal an evil god. Unexpectedly, everything began to reverse, as if time were flowing backward, and she suddenly opened her eyes to find herself back at the age of 4, lying in that small cradle again. During her first rebirth, she felt immense joy, grateful to fate for a new chance, and was determined to live well this time. But she did not succeed. She died again and returned once more to the age of 4. As the tragedy repeated, she cried in her bed, realizing this was already her 4th life. Having become thoroughly familiar with the course of events, she lay calmly in bed, awaiting the arrival of the Empress Dowager. Just as she expected, the maids informed her that she had to choose a father to adopt her. The day of choosing him was the starting point of every rebirth. The first option was Duke Amity, a noble hero who protected the Empire's order. The second was Duke Valois, who came from an ancient family renowned for producing scholars. The third option was Duke Doubled, the #1 villain possessing unparalleled military power and wealth. She recalled the memory of her first life when she had chosen Duke Amity. Because rumors said he was a benevolent man beloved by his people, she was filled with admiration and gratitude for him at the time. She clearly remembered giving him a red flower and a thank you card to express her appreciation. But despite his outward benevolence, she felt a barrier between them. As an orphan, her happiness simply lay in having a father, even if he was busy and away from her most of the time. This situation continued until the true child of destiny, Mina, appeared and expressed deep admiration for the Duke, who then adopted her. It was said she greatly resembled the Duke's deceased first love, thus becoming his new daughter. Soon, the two became very close, and Mina always boasted about being the Duke's daughter. Consequently, the girl found herself completely isolated and ostracized by everyone. The situation worsened when she was imprisoned, accused of attempting to poison Mina. She loudly pleaded her innocence, but no one believed her, instead calling her a lying monster. After being framed, her adoptive father came to express his contempt for her with a cold gaze. He demanded that if she truly repented, she should become a sacrifice. He ordered her to make a noble sacrifice for Mina and the entire world. And so, she met her first death. The god of death greeted her, and then she was reborn again, waking up in terror in her bed at the age of 4. Now, in her 4th life, she considered her options. She thought to herself that she must be insane to return to the Amity family after suffering so much. She remembered that in her 2nd life, she had chosen Duke Valois, and he and his family had welcomed her. But his kind appearance was highly deceptive. He was a bad person who always scolded her for failing to awaken. The sacred inscription, His wife also spread rumors that she was a fake child. In the end, the Duke described her as a useless girl. She died again, surprising even the god of death. In her third life, she tried to run away, but as an orphan with nothing, she couldn't survive. She starved to death on the streets, and the god of death found her again, asking her to stop dying. Now, in this life, she ruled out Duke Amity and Duke Valois, realizing that running away was not a solution. With only one last option remaining, she made her decision with determination and resolve. This sparked surprise and curiosity among the maids. She found herself standing before a lavish and magnificent palace. Her choice was Duke Doubled, the Empire's notorious villain. He looked at her with contempt, wondering if this child was something edible. One of the Duke's aides informed him that the Empress Dowager had issued an imperial decree ordering him to adopt the child. But the Duke responded coldly, thinking the Empress Dowager was mad, and ordered the child to be sent back immediately. Despite his refusal, she was brought before him, gazing at the man named Theodore Doubled, the villain who is said to possess the greatest wealth in the Empire. She marveled at his breathtaking beauty, giving him a perfect score in her mind, and secretly wondered why such a handsome man had remained unmarried for life after his wife's death years ago. Meanwhile, the Duke's aide tried to persuade him to accept the child, suggesting it could be a chance to mend relations with the Holy See, and that refusing the Empress Dowager's request might complicate things later. But she knew the aide was wrong. Through her knowledge of him from past lives, she was certain that threats from the papal office or the Empress Dowager had no effect on him. She had to find a way to survive here. She had deliberately chosen this family for its vast wealth, and because she believed they wouldn't care about her. This fit her plan: save money, then escape the entire empire. Her true goal was exile, and she imagined herself relaxing on a tropical beach at sunset, happy to have escaped the chaotic country. To raise the funds needed for her exile, she realized she had to cling tightly to Duke Doubled. To achieve this, she decided to offer him valuable information. So, she struggled to utter a short phrase, warning him of a surprise tax audit on December 7th. But due to her childish pronunciation, the Duke and his aide couldn't understand what she was saying. This frustrated her. She felt hopeless, as her slower growth compared to other children affected her speech, and that piece of information was her only trump card for survival. Suddenly, the Duke grabbed her, lifting her to his eye level, and clearly repeated her words, asking about the undisclosed tax audit on December 7th, which stunned her because he had understood. To hide her shock, she placed a finger on her lips and whispered that it was a secret. In her heart, she prayed for this plan to succeed. She hoped he would see her usefulness and silently pleaded in her heart for him to adopt her. The Duke then asked his aide about the progress of organizing the accounting records. But the aide seemed skeptical, wondering why the Duke would trust information from a 4-year-old. The child realized the importance of the information she had provided. This audit would cause a huge loss for the Doubled family, enough to catch the attention of a Duke like him. The Duke stared at her with a sharp gaze, harshly questioning whether it was normal for a 4-year-old to know a term like undisclosed tax audit. The terrified aide replied that he would verify the matter immediately. While waiting anxiously, she wondered if her plan had succeeded. The Duke, sitting on his throne, commented that he smelled a skinny, sick horse and ordered a bath to be prepared for her. Fear filled her heart as she worried this was a prelude to being cleaned up and sent back, fearing her information wasn't enough to convince him. In a moment of desperation, she rushed towards him, ignoring the aide's surprise. Then she leaped and hugged the Duke's leg directly. He looked at her in shock and asked what she was doing. She gave him a bright smile and opened her arms, asking to be held. The Duke coldly picked her up by her clothes and told her not to mess around. But deep inside, she was screaming in fear, rejecting the thought of dying and being reborn again. She resolved to eat only a little from now on and never allow herself the thought of receiving love. Then she hugged the Duke tightly, expressing her adoration for him in a childish accent. She clung to him, pleading for him to let her stay. While hugging him, she hoped in her heart that he would fall in her trap and let her stay. These events took place in the vast Wizentra Empire, which possessed the largest territory in the world. In this empire, There were three major powers at the top of the power pyramid. The first was the official state religion, Nereid, and the second was the ruling imperial family. The third was the five great ducal families. But this tripartite balance of power was destined to witness a complete transformation when she turned 15. At that time, one family would rise to prominence, displacing the five great ducal families to become one of the main pillars of power in the empire. And she found herself currently living as an honored guest in this powerful family. She felt relieved that she hadn't been kicked out and was allowed to stay in the castle for the time being. But she realized that the next step was the most crucial part of ensuring her survival. In one scene, she was talking to the Duke's subordinates, who looked confused, wondering what she meant by hat uncle. With a childish smile and a stuttering pronunciation, she explained to them that what they were looking for was in the ancient Auric Alcomplains. Hearing her puzzling words, the men's faces showed shock and confusion, but this soon turned into enthusiasm and admiration. She realized she was paying for her stay with valuable information about the temple and the imperial family. One of them praised her cunning, while she thought to herself that she couldn't take this information to her grave anyway, and the temple's suffering was her joy. The Duke's subordinates privately discussed that these clues proved she was the prophesied child of destiny. But she knew in her heart that it was all fake. The memories of her past lives were a powerful weapon, but they had their limits. It was difficult to maintain an adult mind in a child's body, perhaps because her brain wasn't fully developed. When she wasn't hungry or tired, she could think like an adult and use her memories to get rich. But when hunger or fatigue struck, she would revert to a child who only wanted to drink milk. Once, a subordinate approached her to express his deep admiration, and his sudden touch terrified her. Because of this, she would cling to the Duke, while one of the subordinates watched her sadly. The subordinates noticed that despite being extremely shy around strangers, she was surprisingly attached to the Duke and would only talk about the secrets of the temple and the imperial family when sitting on his lap. Her fear of adult men wasn't intentional, but stemmed from memories of abuse. But around the Duke, she felt a strange sense of comfort. The Duke told her to get down and sit properly. After sharing her precious stories, she immediately complied. One of the subordinates thanked her and gave her a piece of candy, which made her very happy. As the subordinate walked away, praising the cuteness of his own daughter, she was struggling to unwrap the candy. Suddenly, the Duke took the candy from her hand to unwrap it for her, but she was shocked, her eyes welling up with tears. She thought that no matter how evil he was, snatching candy from a small child was an extremely outrageous thing to do. To her surprise, the Duke unwrapped the candy and popped it into her mouth. He then calmly asked if she would tell him those family secrets if he gave her candy, even if they were in the capital. He wanted to use candy as a means to get information. She firmly shook her head, refusing his request. When he asked why, she replied in a confident, childish accent that she was on the Duke's side. A fleeting smile crossed the Duke's face. One of the maids who came to get her noticed the smile and secretly wondered if he had actually smiled. The Duke ordered the maid to make sure the child didn't run around causing trouble. As the maid carried her away, the child thought it was impossible for such a cold person to smile, but then she felt that even if he was a cold person, he was a good choice. Duke Doubled was the master of this paradise-like place. The maids took great care of her, providing her with puzzles, horse rides, and the most delicious food. A sense of happiness washed over her, and she felt this place was truly a paradise. After living in the castle for a few days, she made many moves behind the scenes to ensure a peaceful life under the care of the Doubled family. This included winning the favor of the influential maid, Ringda, whom she would happily circle around whenever she saw her. When she whispered to Ringda that she loved her more than anyone, she succeeded in completely winning her over. She also won the heart of the pastry supervisor, Dahlia, by giving her a precious piece of candy, saying it was saved especially for her. Furthermore, she also succeeded in gaining Dahlia's favor when she quietly told her the same secret, that she loved her more than others. Finally, she also won the favor of the Daily Records officer, Saiso, by expressing that she would be sad if Saiso got hurt. As usual, she completed her mission when she told Saiso that she was her favorite person. And just like that, she became beloved by all the maids. She was confident in her plan. Even if she were hated by the head of the house, like at the Valois Palace, the maids would help her. But the best part about this place was the presence of Leah, who would gently come over and tell her it was time for a nap. One evening, she overheard some servants wondering why a child rumored to be an imposter, with extremely low divine power, was brought to the castle. But Leah angrily interrupted them, scolding them for their rudeness and for slandering the child. She realized then that Leah was kind to her even without her deliberately trying to win favor. When Leah tucked her into bed and wished her sweet dreams, she felt a strange warmth. As she fell asleep in that warmth, she wondered if this was what it felt like to have a mother. She was suddenly awakened by the rumbling of her hungry stomach. She realized this was bad. The intense hunger made it impossible for her to maintain her adult mindset. By neglecting this, she made a fatal mistake. Although a maid tried to wake her, she didn't wake up. When her mentality regressed, she became a troublesome child who only wanted to eat. Although she knew she shouldn't be moving around late at night, impulse overcame reason, and she couldn't maintain her adult mentality, ultimately acting like a child. At that moment, memories from Duke Valois' palace flooded her mind, of the time she was locked in the attic for days. The painful memories of hunger and death took over, so she decided not to succumb to hunger this time and began to greedily devour the potatoes she found. But she was startled by two stern-looking maids who scolded her harshly, wondering if she had a beggar living in her stomach. This made her stop eating in shock and fear. The moment brought back the terrifying memory of starving to death, with a flash of a scene on the street where a lady was feeding her son as she looked longingly at the food in her hands. Fear took hold of her heart, and she felt she was destined to starve. Realizing that her adult mindset was useless in the face of terror, and driven by an intense craving for food, she decided to go find something to fill her stomach herself. She slipped into the dark corridors of the palace, carefully descended the stairs, and looked around. After reaching the ground floor, she pushed open a door that looked like a storage room or a kitchen. Inside, she found a plate with a piece of bread on it, exactly what she was looking for. Happiness washed over her, and she decided to quickly return to her room to eat the bread, realizing she'd be in trouble if she were found wandering. But on her way back, she suddenly bumped into someone. She looked up and saw a man with purple hair and a sharp gaze. Standing before her was the Duke himself. This filled her with extreme shock and terror. In a moment of terror, a story Mina had once told her popped in her mind. It was about a man named Jean Valjean who was punished for stealing bread. Mina had ended the story in a dramatic and tragic way, claiming the man was executed, which heightened the child's fear, making her imagine the worst consequences. She returned to the harsh reality, panicking and wondering what to do. The Duke, with a bone-chilling gaze, asked what she was doing in his castle. She cowered in extreme fear and fell to her knees. She tried to hide the piece of bread, believing she was dead this time. The Duke wondered how she could be so clever at such a young age, suspecting she might really be the child of destiny. She gave an affirmative answer in a trembling and broken voice, but he responded coldly that he hated liars, especially those who feigned innocence with clumsy lies like being on his side. He added in a threatening tone that he was considering the best way to deal with a little rat like her. The child broke down in fear, crying and apologizing, declaring that she had done wrong. The man harshly asked what she had stolen. She replied, trembling, that she had stolen something. The Duke began to guess what she had stolen, wondering if it was money or a holy relic. But she cried and kept shaking her head in denial. Then he wondered if it was a military secret. He roared at her in anger, demanding she say what she stole. With great hesitation, she held up the hidden piece of bread and tried to utter the word bread. The Duke stared at the piece of bread in shock. The child found herself before the Duke, who sat majestically while she ate the bread she had picked up. The maid stood anxiously behind her. Leah, the head maid, explained to the Duke that the child had gone to bed early and missed her proper meal. The Duke thus concluded that, out of hunger, she had picked up and eaten the bread that the servants had discarded. Extreme shame washed over Leah and the other maids, who were saddened by their negligence. The Duke reached out his hand to her, perhaps an unintentional gesture, but it caused her great panic. So she dodged him in terror and clung tightly to Leah, confusing him as the anxious maids watched. The Duke wondered why she was acting this way now when she had been so clingy before. An aide explained that the child was likely scared because she thought she was being scolded for what she did. In Leah's warm embrace, the child cried, not because she hated the Duke, but because she had felt comfortable around him before. But what had just happened made her truly believe she was one step away from death. Leah gently hugged the child, trying to soothe her. Then she stepped forward with rare courage, firmly declaring that the child must finish her meal and stating that she would take her now. Watched by the other servants who were ready to defend her, the servants looked at their master with a mix of anticipation and fear, expecting an angry reaction. There was silence and tension in the air as the servants watched their master. But the Duke unexpectedly and calmly agreed to her request. The servants left quickly, feeling immense relief. Outside, the maids praised Leah's courage, admitting they thought they were dead just now. The child stood before Leah and the maids, whispering an apology for always being hungry. But Leah embraced her kindly, assuring her that children need plenty of food and sleep. Tears welled up in the child's eyes as she realized she wanted to stay in this place, especially for Leah. A few days after the bread incident, the child's life returned to tranquility, with all the servants in the palace greeting her warmly. The maids found her to be very kind in their daily interactions. Her life continued peacefully until she ran into the Duke and his aide in the hallway. She hesitated, wanting to slip away, claiming she was going to study, worried she'd be kicked out if she caused any disturbance. But the Duke called out to her, telling her to wait. She froze in place and answered in fear. The aide whispered to his master that she was still scared, suggesting he call her name kindly to earn her trust. But the child thought the aide was wrong. The Duke probably didn't even know her name. Instead, the Duke ordered her to follow him, and the aide gently led her. The Duke stopped in front of a huge, ornate door, which piqued her curiosity. He then turned to her as he pushed the door open, saying he was going to give this to her. The child, confused and surprised, wondered what the Duke was going to give her. But when she looked behind the door, she found it was completely empty. As she looked around, worry filled her eyes. In a moment of terror, the worst-case scenario came to mind. She imagined the Duke ordering her to be locked in that room, so she wouldn't cause any more trouble. Her body trembled with fear, as this was not what she wanted. The Duke and the aide noticed her state. The Duke asked why she was trembling, and the aide replied that he believed she must still be scared. The Duke looked at her with a calm gaze and then, for the first time, called her by her name, Leblanc. A huge sense of shock hit her. The Duke had known her name all along, something she had never expected. He held out his hand to her, holding a shiny piece of candy, and told her there were many more inside. Her fear turned into surprise and joy. When she looked inside the room, she saw it wasn't empty at all, but a real treasure trove filled with all kinds of candies and baked treats. Overcome with immense happiness, she found herself falling into a sea of candy that covered the entire floor of the room and began to devour the sweets with immense joy, while the Duke and his aide watched her in complete astonishment. She realized she had completely lost her senses, immersed in the dreamlike scene before her, as the room was like something out of a fairy tale. But she felt it was unfair to eat all of this by herself, so she walked over to the Duke and offered him a piece of candy. The Duke was surprised by her gesture, while she continued to eat until her cheeks puffed up. The Duke commented that she looked strange, and she misunderstood his words, angrily wondering what he had said. He explained while gently touching her puffed-up cheeks, comparing her to a little squirrel whose cheeks were about to burst. So she thought to herself that since he was the head of the house, she would let it go. Determined to build a good relationship with him to ensure her survival, she decided to show him the survival skills of a person in their fourth life. She thanked him for the candy with a charming smile. The Duke replied briefly and contentedly, a slight smile on his face. After the candy incident, her life in the palace entered a period of peace and tranquility. Nothing more than simple, childish little things happened. For instance, Leah caught her sneaking the Duke's 7th piece of candy, reminding her of her promise to eat only one a day and warning her that her teeth would rot. Another time, she received a gift from one of the old subordinates. It was a cute, elephant-shaped bag. She happily ran around with it on her back, announcing to the maids that her grandpa had given it to her, which delighted her. She thought the bag was the perfect future escape bag. Her life was filled with such simple moments. But one day, She found the maids dressing her with extra care, even tying an elegant ribbon in her hair. Leah told her with a warm smile that today was the day of her formal debut. The maids expressed their excitement to the Duke's followers and told Leblanc that it would be crowded and that the family was also planning to sponsor a child, which might give her a chance to make a friend. The word sponsorship piqued her curiosity. The sponsorship system was, on the surface, a traditional project for noble families to participate in social contribution. But she knew that wasn't the reality. It was essentially a system for discovering talent, designed to nurture gifted children into the ideal talents desired by the sponsoring family. Children included in the sponsorship would receive various forms of support, such as education and the tools needed to develop their gifts. In addition to giving the chosen children a chance to integrate into the high society established by the sponsoring family, the sponsorship system also provided them with a systematic education based on accumulated data. Furthermore, the children would receive enormous financial support, and for this reason, the more powerful the sponsoring family, the more people sought and competed for their sponsorship. Currently, even children of rural nobles had a chance to receive sponsorship from high-ranking nobles. As Leah prepared to escort her, Leblanc was thinking that the child sponsored by a powerful family like the Doubles must be a remarkable figure, and she secretly wondered about that person's identity. She and Leah walked down a luxurious hallway, and as they neared the reception hall, Leah pointed out his presence. It was a blond boy named Jude. He was elegantly receiving the attending nobles, greeting them accurately by name and title, which elicited their deep admiration for his precocious intellect. Leblanc felt she also had to make a good impression, so she went forward and greeted them with a bright, childlike smile. She succeeded in capturing the nobles' attention, who were moved by her cuteness, expressing surprise at the beautiful child who was so good at polite greetings. But when her gaze fell on the boy named Jude, it was clear that a violent shock hit her. Because this boy, she recognized him immediately. Hidden beneath his innocent face was a wicked smile, and she remembered him as one of the worst people she had ever met, Marco Jude. Her memory returned to her second life, when she was the daughter of Duke Valois and had entered the academy. Their professor had called her to his office. That person was Jude, and he praised her for her excellent grades that semester. But his motives were sinister, and he relentlessly harassed her, coveting the position of Duke Valois' son-in-law. His actions were extremely disgusting, and she could no longer tolerate his behavior. So she decided to report him, but he turned the tables, accusing her of seducing him. He tried to persuade others with a weak argument, questioning why she hadn't reported him from the beginning if she was truly bothered. But at the time, she didn't understand what was happening at first, and she had never imagined that a man 10 years her senior, and her professor at that, could harbor such malice. It even got to the point where he berated her, saying that if she really hated it, she would have screamed, and that she must have been enjoying it. The truth was, she was so terrified that her body froze, and she couldn't even scream. In the end, her protests were ignored, and his only punishment was merely a deduction of 6 months' salary. And she was labeled as promiscuous and expelled from the academy, standing alone with her bag outside the school gates. Back in the present, she listened to Jude speak confidently before the nobles, and rage burned in her chest, giving her a strong urge to slap him. But she tried to calm herself down, reminding herself that he was just a child now, and if she hit him for actions he would commit in the future, she would look like a lunatic. Jude continued to boast, claiming he had designed some equations with his teacher, which impressed those present, who thought it was a remarkable feat. But she knew in her heart that he was a fraud. He was notoriously stupid at the academy, and she remembered him always turning to his father to help him with his problems. She concluded that, just like at the academy, his parents must have paid a real genius to design those equations for him. She was forced to sit side by side with Jude on a sofa, which made her even more nervous. He looked at her with a sly smile, asking if she saw what he saw, which made her even more confused. As he glanced around to see if anyone was listening to them, Jude leaned closer to her and whispered insults in her ear, saying that a fake person like her could never defeat him. His words caused her confusion, and she wondered if this child really felt threatened by an even younger child. It wasn't until she realized that he saw her as a competitor for the sponsorship opportunity. At first, she decided to ignore him, trying to stay calm and think about other things. But he continued to harass her, saying he heard she was a pitiful child and that the Empress Dowager had thrown her into the Doubled's trash can. Then he added with a wicked smile that she was trash, just like them. His words reminded her of her weakness in her previous lives, when she was foolish and naive, afraid of the world she was thrown into alone. She couldn't respond to the insults and could only lower her head. But she was no longer that weak girl. The person who had died 3 times and was now living her 4th life was completely different. So she suddenly and swiftly threw a punch, hitting him hard in the face. Everyone present, from the servants to the nobles, was shocked. She didn't stop at 1 punch, but continued to hit him in the face repeatedly until she finally knocked him to the ground. And the maids celebrated her victory as if they were at a boxing ring. Jude's father stood up, shocked by what had happened, wondering what this behavior meant. He rushed to his son, asking if he was okay. Jude tried to justify himself to his father, claiming that the crazy girl had suddenly attacked him. Leblanc interrupted him, pointing her finger at him, and shouted in a childlike accent that he was a bad boy. The attending nobles were surprised by her words, not understanding what she meant. So she explained loudly that she was here because Doubled is trash, which was understood as her being there, because Jude had said the Doubled family was trash. The hall fell silent, as Jude's father tried to soothe his son, and the servants were all looking at her. Leblanc began to feel anxious. She worried if she had made a mistake, afraid that the Duke would be angry, thinking that violent behavior was unbecoming of a noble. When she was surprised to see the servants and followers shedding tears of emotion. They thought she was angry on their behalf, and saw her as a true angel. Their reaction confused her, as she had only wanted to hit Marco. Meanwhile, Jude shouted loudly, denying what she had said, claiming he couldn't possibly have said such a thing and that she was lying. At this point, Duke Doubled intervened with an icy gaze. He wanted to know what was up with that thing that dared to insult the child under his protection. Jude's father tried to remedy the situation, claiming it was just a slip of the tongue from his son due to frustration. He added that his son couldn't possibly have referred to the Doubled family. The Duke looked coldly at Jude and said that since his father insisted, he would give him a chance. Then, with a terrifying threat, he asked him if he dared to swear on the truth of his words, even if it meant burning his thighs and gouging out his eyes. If he dared to swear, the Duke would overlook the disturbance he had caused by being there. He added that if he couldn't prove his honesty, the matter wouldn't end with just him. This filled Jude with extreme fear. Then the Duke asked him again in a calm, yet terrifying voice, was his child lying, or was she telling the truth? The cunning Marco couldn't withstand Duke Doubled's pressure, and he began to stammer, trying to speak the truth. Leblanc watched this scene confidently, knowing that Jude would never dare to lie in front of the Duke. Sure enough, Jude admitted with a tremble that what Leblanc had said was true. His father was horrified by his confession. Next, the father knelt before the Duke and begged for forgiveness, admitting that he had committed a capital crime. But the Duke coldly ordered the guards to dispose of them, referring to the father and son. And so, they were dragged away by the guards amidst their pleas for mercy. The scene was quite spectacular. The little girl confidently confronting a boy larger than her, calmly explaining the situation and winning the admiration of the Duke's followers. But they didn't know the truth of the matter, and instead imagined a whole drama. They thought Jude had bullied her, and as a guest of the palace, she couldn't stir up trouble. So she had endured his personal insults, but she couldn't stand his insults toward the Doubled family. So they imagined she was bravely defending the family's honor. She looked at them with an innocent smile, realizing this was what they believed. Although her conscience pricked a little, she decided to take advantage of the situation. She looked on the bright side, as she had succeeded in making a good impression on the Duke's confidants. As she sat on the Duke's lap, she wondered if she had also made a good impression on him, since he had protected her in the end. She was surprised when one of the aides stroked her hair and commented on her cuteness, so she recoiled in fear. The followers noticed this and talked amongst themselves about her shyness in front of adult men, and how she only allowed the Duke to hold her, concluding that it was because of her deep love for him. One of the aides was delighted that he was so favored, commenting that she only smiled for the Duke. The rest of the followers joined in, expressing their intense jealousy of him, saying that those who have everything will never understand the sorrow of those who have nothing. But the Duke commented with a sly smile that it was very annoying, which frustrated her, because she just wanted to get along with him, but he saw it as merely a nuisance. But as they say, after hardship comes happiness. After the followers began to admire her, many things changed, including her gaining permission to go out. Even the administrative staff, who had never seen her, began to take an interest in her. She was very happy because she was going out to buy some things she needed. She strolled through the crowded market accompanied by Leah, enjoying the festive atmosphere. A toy store caught her eye, and she stopped in front of it. She remembered a rabbit-shaped doll, one that would become a huge success at the time. The doll would say, "I love you," and hug tightly. In her first life, it was also very popular. Her memory returned to that life when she stood in front of the same store, hoping her father, Duke Amity, would buy her the doll. But he refused her request, saying the money for the doll could be donated to save countless hungry people. Leblanc remembered Duke Amity asking her if she still wanted the doll. She lowered her head and replied that she didn't. So he praised her, considering her actions noble, and told her that although she had lost the doll, she had gained compassion and consideration for others. But in truth, she desperately wanted that doll. Years later, when she was 18, Duke Amity gave the same doll to Mina. As he watched Mina rejoice with the doll like a child, his face broke into a smile brighter than the one he had on the day he taught her about consideration. Leblanc decided to shake off this painful memory and stop thinking about that time. Just then, Leah interrupted her thoughts, kindly offering to buy her a toy since they were out. Leblanc was delighted by Leah's kindness, as Leah thought she was staring at the toys, because she wanted one. They entered the store, and Leah told her she could pick anything she wanted. This excited the other accompanying maids as well, and Leblanc began to browse the store with enthusiasm. As she wandered, her gaze fell on something else, a brooch in the shape of a red carnation. She suddenly remembered that Thanksgiving Day was approaching. It was a day when children gave flowers to their parents to express their gratitude. She thought it would be nice to buy them a gift, but a toy seemed like an inappropriate choice. Although the wooden toys on display looked fun, she decided not to waste this precious opportunity on a toy. She pointed at the pin, but Leah explained to her in confusion that it wasn't a toy, but a carnation-shaped brooch. So Leblanc told her she wanted to buy it as a gift for someone the children at the orphanage were very fond of. While Leah was still guessing the person's identity, Leblanc was secretly planning to give the brooch to Leah herself on the upcoming Thanksgiving Day, hoping she would reward her with more snacks. She had considered giving it to the Duke, but she remembered his cold reaction earlier when she expressed her affection, and how he had considered it merely a nuisance. So she was afraid of annoying him and losing his favor. Leah agreed to buy the pin, and Leblanc decided to surprise her with it later at the palace. One of the followers noticed that another follower's clothes were adorned with a carnation pin. When someone asked if he had received it from his daughter, he replied with pride and great happiness. He explained that his daughter had put it on for him, saying that tomorrow was Thanksgiving Day, and he felt that this was true happiness in life, and nothing could compare to the joy of raising a child. The other followers agreed, wondering what use honor and wealth were compared to the happiness of a child's affection. Then one of them turned to the Duke, who was watching them silently, and told him that he must have felt the same happiness when he received a carnation. They added that they pitted those who had never received a carnation, those who couldn't feel this happiness, whose lives were meaningless. They asked him if he agreed with them, but the Duke replied with a sharp coldness that he didn't know that feeling. The Duke's followers were stunned by his affirmative answer, wondering how that could be. The Duke explained coldly that in his entire life, he had never received a carnation. Their shock intensified, and they couldn't believe he had never received one, especially since he had 3 sons. They were curious about the coldness of the doubled family. One of the followers tried to ease the atmosphere, saying that boys are naturally not delicate and that a simple thank you would suffice. But the Duke replied with even greater coldness that he had never even heard the word thank you from them. The followers felt awkward, realizing that the more they talked, the more awkward it became for the Duke. Just then, Leblanc appeared, walking down the hallway with Leah, holding a bouquet of red carnations. The followers cried out happily upon seeing her and pointed out to the Duke that they were carnations. They were ecstatic, believing that the Duke was finally going to receive a carnation, and that Leblanc must be so grateful to him to have bought the flowers herself. A faint smile appeared on the Duke's face, and he agreed with them. That carnations were a source of joy. The followers suggested that Leblanc give him the flowers now that the opportunity was ripe. Leblanc felt awkward, as it was her first time giving carnations, especially since she remembered how Duke Amity had rejected her in the past. She walked over to Leah, gave her the flowers, and thanked her. This surprised Leah, who wondered if the flowers were for her. The scene fell into a dead silence. The followers' expressions froze, and an icy, terrifying look appeared on the Duke's face. The followers, realizing their mistake, shrank back and whispered that they didn't know the flowers were for a maid. Leblanc happily ran to Leah, who thanked her and promised to cherish her gift. After Leah hugged her, she felt a slight pain in the back of her head and was wondering why, when she suddenly heard the Duke call her name in an icy tone. She answered him with a tremble. He asked her coldly, wasn't there anything for him? She was confused and quickly gave a negative answer, then saved the situation with a forced smile, justifying that she didn't want to bother him and that she did the right thing, right? Amidst the tension of the followers and the Duke's anger, Leah took her hand and led her back inside. That night, an order was issued to cancel Thanksgiving Day throughout the entire double territory. This confused Leblanc and everyone else. The days passed, and Leblanc enjoyed her time in her room. She observed Leah from afar, noticing that she really liked the carnation brooch she had given her, wearing it carefully for several days. One day, an aide came to her and asked if she wanted to go to the Duke's office. She jumped up excitedly and immediately agreed, because today was the day set to report her recent situation to the Empress Dowager. The aide noticed she seemed very energetic today. She walked with him, and the maids bid her farewell, wishing her a safe trip. When Leblanc and the aide entered the Duke's office, she noticed a strange box and asked what it was. The aide told her they were organizing the gifts to be presented to the Emperor on his birthday. She then remembered that at this time, every year, the nobles would be frantically busy preparing gifts. Even Duke Amity, who didn't care for petty gains, was keen on giving a decent gift, and so was Duke Valois, who would even borrow money to exaggerate the gift preparations. Valois spent lavishly on such occasions, but was extremely stingy in other matters, especially with her. She remembered one time when she, out of ignorance, bought an expensive ink pen. He beat her brutally, calling her a parasite who lived off others. Then he dragged her by the hair and ordered her not to think about leaving the attic for a while. She remembered hearing Duke Valois' children talking behind the door, one of them wondering why she was being scolded, since buying a pen was considered a school supply, and no father would hate buying one for his child. But another explained the reason for her scolding. The reason was that she was not his biological daughter. In that moment, Leblanc realized a painful truth. Because she wasn't a biological daughter, she would be hated for even the most trivial reasons, which meant she had to struggle desperately to survive. She returned to the present, realizing she had to do something to win Duke Doubled's favor, or her chance of being adopted would be lost. She ran swiftly to the Duke's office. She entered in a panic, only to find the Duke looking at her coldly from behind his glasses. She wondered inwardly why he looked displeased. She moved closer to the aide, trying to hide behind him. The aide whispered to her that the Duke wasn't angry at her, but about something else. Then he told her to prepare 2 carnations next time. She suddenly realized the reason for his anger. All the money she had spent at the store ultimately belonged to the Doubleds, and despite splurging, she hadn't bought him anything. She panicked, thinking it was no wonder he was angry. She wanted to go out and buy him something now, but she worried her actions would look like a ridiculous protest, so she decided to do something else to please him. Instead, she began to search her memory for any information that might be helpful to him. She remembered the birthday gift Duke Valois had given the Emperor and how he had boasted about it. But when she saw it, she wondered why there was a stone in the luxurious jewelry box. As she got closer to the stone, she felt a mysterious power rising from it, wondering what it was. It was a strange feeling, like a voice entering her consciousness, without going through her ears. The voice was asking, "What is this?" It was a voice calling her my child, saying it had been waiting for her for a long time. At that moment, the palace shook violently, and the aide wondered if it was an earthquake. But Duke Valois realized it might be a sign of a volcanic eruption, so he ordered an expedition to be sent to Mount Robus. Leblanc's memory returned to the Duke's office, and the shaking suddenly stopped. She wondered about the light that had flowed into her body and what it was. Even stranger, her body was moving involuntarily, as if it no longer belonged to her. She found herself walking toward the gift box and grabbing the stone. The stone turned to dust in her hand, which shocked her. The aide and the Duke. Extreme panic enveloped her. The aide wondered in surprise. If this was the Noit Stone she had heard about countless times in her 3 lives, as it was a crucial artifact from the ruins of the evil god. The aide tried to appease the Duke, explaining that the mistake wasn't the child's fault, but that improper storage had caused the stone to shatter. But the Duke coldly commented on how annoying the matter was. Leblanc tried to defend herself, saying she didn't do it on purpose, but the Duke cut her off harshly, calling her a nuisance. She felt hopeless, as not only had she failed to win his favor, but she had also caused a huge problem. The Duke ordered her to stop causing trouble and go back to her room. As the aide was leading her out of the office, she suddenly lost consciousness. The Duke was shocked as he saw her collapse in front of him. She heard the Duke's voice calling her my child. She saw Duke Amity, her benevolent and righteous father, whom she greatly respected. She remembered having to give up many things to live as his daughter, but it was all worth it as long as he called her name and smiled at her. However, there was always a wall between her and her father. He gave her a room to live in, taught her the duties of a noble, and dined with her. But he never opened his heart to her or treated her like a biological daughter. Then Mina appeared, calling the Duke father. It was different with Mina. He allowed her to cling to him, and he would show her a radiant smile he never showed to her. She tried to convince herself that it was natural, as Mina was the true child of destiny. Mina was a good child. She brought rain during a drought and brought hope to the poor and sick, so it was only natural that everyone loved her. She believed that if she tried harder, her father would see her too. So she decided to sleep less and give more to others. But what she faced was not gratitude, but the wrath of Duke Valois, who called her a stupid thing and an insolent rat. He would scold her, saying she should at least die on the streets so someone could clean up her corpse, calling her a useless girl. She would beg him not to hit her and apologize constantly. She woke up from this terrible nightmare, found herself in bed, and realized she had fainted. Leblanc sat up in bed, anxiously thinking about the Noit Stone and what she should do. She found that the servants of the doubled family were truly kind, and the Duke himself was much better than she had heard. But fear began to creep into her heart, and she cried, wondering what she would do if these good people came to hate her too. Suddenly, a flash of lightning lit up the room, followed by thunder. She thought it was just thunder, but something outside the window caught her attention. At that moment, Leah was talking anxiously with the other maids. They were worried after the doctor told them he didn't know the cause of the child's fainting. Another maid interrupted their conversation, telling Leah that she had given the child fever medicine. Leah rushed into Leblanc's room, only to find it empty. Meanwhile, an aide burst into the Duke's office and reported in shock that the child was missing. Hearing this news, a sharp look appeared on the Duke's face. The news spread through the palace, and everyone from the aides to the maids began to search for her anxiously. They searched every corner, but couldn't find her in the annex or the kitchen. The Duke began to think she might be looking for bread everywhere. The aide told him they had already looked and couldn't find her anywhere. Various terrible scenarios began to flash through the Duke's mind. Perhaps it was the work of an assassin targeting the family, or someone had kidnapped her for ransom. Or maybe it was the council elders who hated the child of destiny. A maid's scream, saying she had been found, interrupted his thoughts. Everyone rushed to the garden and found Leblanc there. Leah ran toward her, full of concern. The Duke found her standing barefoot in the rain, shivering from the cold. She walked toward him with an innocent smile, holding a small red flower in her hand. She asked him in a childlike voice if he liked flowers. Then she began to cry, admitting she was wrong and begging him to forgive her. The Duke remembered the harsh words he had said to her earlier, and that she hadn't meant to cause trouble. The Duke couldn't answer her. The child was pale, desperately wringing her hands, and looked extremely pitiful. For the first time, he felt regret for being harsh with her. In the next scene, Leblanc found herself in a luxurious bathroom, with the Duke standing before her, and she panicked, wondering what he was going to do to her. She believed that a single carnation was not enough to earn her forgiveness, especially since she had also destroyed the Noit Stone. She had expected him to torture her with water, but was surprised to find him placing her feet in a basin of warm water. He then sat in front of her and kindly asked if she was in pain. She shyly shook her head, but she told him her feet hurt a little, and she noticed he was gently rubbing them. She realized his movements were becoming steadier and gentler. As she was terrifiedly speculating what he would do to her, Duke Doubled unexpectedly asked kindly if she was in pain, then told her not to run around the palace late at night. The child, stunned by his calm reaction, asked in a childish voice if that was all, amazed that he wasn't angry. The Duke gently stroked her head, showing a faint smile she had never seen before, and told her he wasn't angry. For some strange reason, Leblanc felt the pain in her feet disappear, and the Duke no longer seemed as frightening as before. In the following days, she moved with great caution, feeling as if she were walking on thin ice. But the Duke never scolded her or showed any displeasure. Not only that, but instead of throwing away the flower she gave him, he placed it in a vase on his desk. Leblanc was puzzled by him, wondering what on earth he was thinking, and why he kept the humble gift instead of getting angry at her. This behavior was very strange for Duke Doubled, who was known for wiping out entire tribes when displeased, yet now he was even dining with her. Meanwhile, the calls of the maids interrupted her thoughts. Leblanc turned to them with childlike confusion. The maids excitedly told her she had to get ready to meet the merchants and asked if she wanted to go with them, assuring her there would be many wonderful things that would be fun. Leblanc immediately realized the Duke was buying these things to give to the Emperor as compensation for the Noit stone she had broken. So she happily agreed. The maids told her it would be some time before the merchants arrived and suggested she go to the library in the meantime. It sounded like a good idea. Leblanc agreed with great enthusiasm. When she arrived, she was stunned by the library's size and beauty, and Tissue asked her to pick a book. The maids began showing her different books. Linda brought out a book on social skills titled 101 Ways to Scam, while Dahlia brought a book called Beat the Crap Out of Every Damn Person, insisting it was a truly good book. Tissue criticized the violent choice and picked a book about moneylenders for her. The maids fell into a chaotic argument about books unsuitable for children, covering topics from illegal scams to violence. Leblanc was still pretending she couldn't read yet, so she decided to pick a book with a nice cover. As she wandered between the shelves, a strange book with no title caught her eye. She noticed it was old and unusual, wondering how such a book could be in the library. She opened the book and found it was written in an ancient language, but she could understand its contents. The book spoke of the founding Emperor Fred War's greatest achievement, defeating Ivan, one of the followers of the evil god. According to Ivan's records, 2 conditions were necessary to manifest the power of the evil god. The first condition was contact with a holy relic, which was considered the key to awakening one's potential. The second condition was to obtain a medium in order to use that power. Leblanc pondered the authenticity of the book in her mind. As she thought about the 2 conditions, she felt a sense of foreboding. She wondered why this matter had to be connected to the evil god. The book explained that the Empire's guardian deity, the righteous Nereid, had sealed the evil god, the source of all evil, to protect humanity. However, over time, that seal began to weaken. Painful memories flooded Leblanc's mind as she read. She remembered that to reseal the evil god, the power of the true child of destiny, Mina, was needed, and she herself was a sacrifice in those sealing rituals. The rituals were so painful that she wished they would just kill her quickly to end her suffering. One of the maids anxiously asked how she was doing, interrupting her dark thoughts. So Leblanc quickly composed herself and claimed with childlike innocence that the lion in the story was scary. The trick worked on the maids, who found her actions incredibly cute and began to dote on her, thinking their child was frightened by the roar of an evil lion. Despite the difficult situation, Leblanc felt relieved that things weren't too bad. She continued to feign fear, and just then, Leah approached her. Leblanc's expression changed instantly, and she asked with childlike enthusiasm and joy if the merchants had arrived. Leah gave an affirmative answer and asked if she wanted to go see, so Leblanc let out a happy shout. Leblanc found herself in the grand reception hall of the Doubled family, stunned by the luxury. A huge tapestry caught her eye, and she realized it must be the founding emperor's tapestry, which, as she had heard, was written in an ancient language. She remembered that this tapestry was acquired by Duke Doubled after conquering the Ice territory. The imperial palace itself coveted it, but they couldn't take it from the Doubled family. Thus, the tapestry became a symbol of the family's military might. Nobles who admired it followed suit, decorating their halls with tapestries, although most of them ended up just imitating the idea. As she was admiring the place, the merchant Tuba and his men walked in, paying their respects to the Duke. Panic seized Leblanc as she wondered in horror why he was here. Tuba stepped forward, expressing what what a great honor it was to be summoned. Leblanc remembered he was a self-made man. One of the Duke's aides told him they needed an item to replace the Noit stone. Taba confidently replied that no one was better at handling objects comparable to the Noit. But Leblanc knew his true story. He was originally a slave from a fallen nation who became a merchant sought after by top nobles. But in reality, he was a con artist who sold forged paintings to the royal family. When this was later revealed along with his many previous scams, it caused a huge scandal. Leah noticed her anxious gaze, while Leblanc anxiously wondered if he intended to deceive the doubled family as well. Taba recommended an artifact. When asked about it, he presented a stone tablet engraved with ancient writing. He explained that the tablet had delivered prophecies in ancient times. One of the Duke's followers commented that a stone tablet with a divine prophecy would be considered a holy relic, which was better than an artifact of the evil god. Another suggested it would be the perfect gift for the Duke's coming-of-age ceremony. The Duke asked if he was sure this was the tablet that delivered prophecies, and Taba affirmed that historical documents recorded similar objects and that it had been confirmed to contain powerful divine energy. The followers believed that if it was verified by the temple and came from Taba's merchant guild, it was trustworthy. Taba added with a dramatic flair that he had personally discovered it on an ancient highland, and that he hadn't given up despite being attacked by hordes of monsters. Taba continued his speech, claiming he couldn't abandon the tablet because he felt it would one day help someone. The Duke's followers were moved by his story, commenting that he had been through a lot. But the Duke cut them off, telling him to set that aside and name a price. Taba told him he would sell it for 100 million. The Duke's followers were stunned. It was a huge sum typically used for a national budget. One of them pointed out that no matter how rich the doubled family was, it wasn't an amount that could be spent lightly, but at the end of the day, it was the only thing that could replace the Noit. Leblanc was shocked by this, as the Duke's followers deliberated anxiously, while Taba watched them with sly confidence. Leblanc decided to expose him. Suddenly, Taba saw her and warmly welcomed her, the child of destiny, inviting her to come closer for a look. Leblanc walked toward the tablet, and an aide tried to stop her, worried it might get damaged. She sat before the tablet, mesmerized by its external beauty. Taba asked if she could feel the divine power, while a follower warned her not to break it. Then Taba slyly suggested that since she was the child of destiny, perhaps she could read the ancient language. An aide scoffed at him, thinking how a child who couldn't even speak the imperial language could possibly decipher ancient texts. So Taba had to claim he was joking. But Leblanc began to read the inscription in her childish voice, surprising everyone. She said it read, "Here lies No 2, who worked hard for his family his whole life." Taba and the followers were equally shocked. Then she pointed her finger at him, wondering if he was a fool because it was written right there, and described him as a swindler and the tablet as nothing more than a tombstone. A follower wondered in confusion how she could read the tablet's contents. Leblanc knew that the ancient language was difficult to read even for high-ranking members of the temple, as only a few characters had been deciphered. She also knew that a vivid interpretation of the ancient language would emerge in 10 years, though even after that, only a very few people could read it, as it was completely different from modern script. She knew that by the time she died, only 3 people had learned the ancient language: the future crown prince, Adrian Luerg, Duke Doubled's eldest son Johann Doubled, and herself. Therefore, Taba's claim that he had excavated it from the ancient highlands was a lie from the start, as the Calusa cemetery was located in the complete opposite direction of the ancient highlands. A follower asked in shock if that was really what was written, that she could read the ancient language, and that it wasn't a prophecy tablet, but a tombstone. Leblanc gave an affirmative answer with an innocent smile, while Taba screamed that it was impossible. Taba's words stunned one of the Duke's followers, so he asked Leblanc if what she said was true. The child replied with childlike confidence that she could. A follower leaned toward her and asked how she learned, as Leblanc had already prepared an answer for this anticipated question. She answered innocently that the words just appeared before her, taking advantage of the fact that she was still a 4-year-old child. The trick worked on the followers, who found it cute and concluded that the words might be self-interpreting and that such a young child couldn't possibly lie. This was also the answer Mina used to use, because when asked how she read ancient texts, she would simply reply that they just appeared without knowing why. At the time, everyone believed her, thinking it was proof that she was the true child of destiny, carrying the power of the gods. Through that experience, Leblanc learned how to use the title Child of Destiny, especially since she still held it in name. Tuba interrupted the scene with an angry scream, calling her a liar. He claimed he had proof that what he said was true and that the temple would verify it. Then he mockingly wondered how she would prove she could read the ancient language, thinking that was the real problem. Leblanc replied coldly, accusing him of making it all up while the followers whispered in confusion. Tuba continued his challenge, saying the only one who could write the ancient language was the founding emperor, and how could a child like her possibly do it? But Leblanc knew her situation was completely different from Mina's, as she was being questioned as a child of destiny. So she walked to the founding emperor's tapestry and, in her childish voice, began to read the ancient inscription on it. It said, "Blessings upon the one who brings the letter." Then she continued to read out the founding emperor's full name, Fred Annesses Semin Calliard. The Duke himself was shocked, as this was the founding emperor's true name. The followers were stunned, wondering if that was really his name, and that his middle name was Semin. The Semin tribe was said to be a people created by the evil god, a tribe that was now taboo to even mention. It would be disastrous if the world knew that the founding emperor came from a cursed tribe. Therefore, the royal family chose to hide his origins and removed his middle name from all records. Because of this, no one knew his real name except for a very few people, mainly the royal family and a few high-ranking nobles like Duke Doubled. Leblanc explained with a bright smile that her reading his true name was definitive proof that she was reading the truth. The followers had no choice but to believe her, wondering if she really was the child of destiny. One of the aides commented that he thought she was just smart, but this was far more than that. Then another follower angrily pointed out that this meant Tuba had deceived them. Tuba collapsed in fear, claiming he had climbed to his position in the name of God. But the Duke replied with sarcastic coldness, commenting on the absurdity of the situation. He demanded proof from a child, yet invoked the gods when faced with a question he couldn't answer. Tuba stammered in panic. Leblanc watched him with false sympathy, understanding exactly how he felt, and whispered for him to run, noting that the Duke had been cold to her lately. I might have sensed something at that moment. The Duke commented that it seemed he had been too lenient lately, so much so that even bugs were trying to climb up. Then he ordered one of his aides, North, to take this so-called chosen one of God to the dungeon. As he was leaving, the Duke ordered him to bring back a clear answer about the tablet, even if he had to cut open his stomach to see if there was a divine will inside. North promised. Tuba tried to protest, but quickly broke down, confessing everything before the investigation even began, begging the Duke for mercy, and admitting he had committed a capital crime. He confessed that he had deceived them because he needed money. He had to obtain a certain holy relic to deal with the Pope, and its price was astronomical, which prompted him to seek funds by any means necessary. Leblanc wondered what kind of artifact would make him so desperate to resort to fraud. That item was the Ittoil, the artifact that gave Mina her immense power. It was in itself considered proof that the holder was the child of destiny. But Leblanc noticed its color was different from Mina's Ittoil. Mina's was platinum-colored, while this one was gold, and even the gem on top looked different. Leblanc realized with a shock that this was not the Ittoil kept by the temple. A sly smile appeared on the Duke's face. A second Ittoil had appeared, and North immediately understood why Tuba had gone mad. The Ittoil was a sacred symbol of the Nereid sect, and he wanted to know its current location. North told him it was at the bottom of the sea, but there was a problem. It was not within the Empire's waters, but exactly 10 meters past the territorial waters of a foreign continent. The Duke understood that this was why the sect couldn't act directly. Nereid, as the state religion of the Empire, could not intervene there, as it would provoke a war. Leblanc realized Tuba planned to use the Ittoil to make a deal with a foreign king, which explained why he needed such a large sum of money. The Duke confirmed that they had to obtain an artifact like the Ittoil. So North asked if he was going to negotiate with the foreign king, but the Duke replied sarcastically, wondering why go to all that trouble when you can just start a war. The aide responded enthusiastically that he would prepare immediately. Leblanc was impressed by this stunning solution and decided never to mess with him again. North thanked Leblanc, believing it was all thanks to her. The child was confused by his words, so he explained that due to the collapse of Ittoil, they had found the second Ittoil. Leblanc wondered if it was really worth all this effort. She also wondered if the Duke felt the same way, so she decided to test it. Leblanc grabbed the edge of the Duke's clothes and asked for a hug with childlike enthusiasm. She looked at him with wide eyes, promising to be a good girl. She added in her mind that she could grow up well on her own without being a burden to anyone. North and the Duke looked at her, moved by her words. Then she gathered her courage and asked him to be her father. The Duke took her in his arms. He asked softly if this was how he should hold her. Leblanc felt immense joy, even though he hadn't explicitly agreed to be her father. This was enough for her for now. More importantly, he was smiling at her, making her feel that he didn't see her as a nuisance. Later, Leblanc achieved another small accomplishment. She successfully put on her own socks for the first time. Leah congratulated her enthusiastically, commenting on how much she had grown. The other maids praised her cleverness, considering her a true genius. Driven by a sense of accomplishment, Leblanc firmly declared that she wanted to see the Duke. The maids rejoiced, thinking the decisive moment had finally arrived. Leah encouraged her to go show the master of the castle what she could do. When Leblanc entered the Duke's office, he was busy writing. An aide informed him of her arrival. She approached enthusiastically and proudly told him she could now wear socks. The Duke looked at her with a faint smile and asked if it was true. Leblanc felt confident, as it seemed the Duke no longer disliked her as much as before, and he had even held her last time. She realized that if she handled this right, she might be able to seal the adoption deal. She had to prove she wasn't a child who always needed help. To her, this was like a job interview. The maids were in the distance, enthusiastically encouraging her. She began to explain Leblanc's guide to putting on socks, outlining the steps. First, spread the opening of the sock with your fingers. Second, aim for the toes. But at the third step, which required all her strength to pull the sock up in one go, the attempt failed. However, the followers found it extremely cute, thinking it didn't matter if she couldn't put it on because she was too adorable for it to matter. She tried again and failed again, causing the followers to chuckle. Leblanc felt she looked pathetic, but Leah interrupted her, confirming that she had indeed succeeded just a moment ago and that she had seen it with her own eyes. The Duke interrupted her failed attempts. He stated sternly that he could not tolerate someone living in his castle without making any progress. Leblanc trembled and replied that she understood, for she knew the Duke was strict even with his own sons. His second and youngest sons were already attending an elite academy for geniuses in the capital. Even his eldest son was at a foreign boarding school on the other side of the world. If he sent his sons to study at such a young age, he wouldn't be lenient with her either. But he surprised her by smiling and telling her to practice while he was away inspecting the territory. Leblanc enthusiastically promised. She assured him she would be a good daughter to her dad and do her best. This scene sparked jealousy among the followers. So one of them asked if she really loved the Duke that much. She nodded, thinking that he was the one who might adopt her. The followers commented that the feeling must be wonderful, but the Duke gave a negative reply. Leblanc was surprised by his blunt response. So, the Duke left the next day to inspect his territory. Leblanc was walking down the hallway, thinking that the Duke said he would be back in 20 days. She just needed a quiet place to practice putting on her socks alone. But suddenly, she heard some strange voices and wondered what was happening. It was a priest from the sect who had crossed the castle gates without the Duke's permission. He claimed he was here to take the young miss. A guard protested that the matter could wait until the Duke returned, but the priest explained that the Pope was currently the young miss's official and legal guardian, and a guardian did not need the landowner's permission to pick up their own child. Leblanc realized with horror that they were going to take her, and if they took her, they would send her to Duke Valois. She began to recall memories of Duke Valois. Torturing her, the doubled family, despite its short history, had achieved great prosperity through its unique style of education. They were born in the blood of their relatives and raised to be butchers. Theodore Doubled was the most perfect head the family had ever had. He possessed immense magical power, a perfectly balanced physique, and keen senses. Within a few years of taking over leadership, the doubled family's wealth had doubled. Combined with his cruel ability to completely exclude emotions, he embodied the ideal of the perfect doubled form. Meanwhile, at the regional inspection office, the men were eating anxiously, one of them commenting that he didn't know if the food was going down his throat or up his nose. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Someone sensed the presence of magic, pointing out that possessing magical items for non-defensive purposes was forbidden. Another man tried to justify it, claiming the tool was for communication and that he had been asked to buy fabric for the child. A guard angrily asked why a magical communication tool was needed to buy fabric. He added that he needed to inspect it and demanded he hand it over, which added to the man's confusion. Meanwhile, Leblanc was elsewhere practicing calling for the Duke, trying to pronounce his name correctly. He was worried that, if she couldn't pronounce his name correctly, he might end up hating her. But the men watching her found it extremely cute, with one of them commenting that he had received the magical tool as payment for buying the fabric. Through this tool, one of the Duke's aides was observing the scene. He wondered why she liked his master so much, while the Duke himself was also watching her, commenting that she was an odd child. Meanwhile, a follower was happily commenting on how cute humans were. But the Duke did not feel the same. Instead, he looked grim. He didn't find her cute, had never found anyone cute, and didn't even know what that feeling was supposed to be like. To him, she looked like a crushed bug, but she caught his attention because she somehow moved, and he kept staring at her because the mole on her face looked interesting. Every time she looked up, her skin would tighten and the mole would get bigger, which was strange. The followers sensed that their master was not pleased. They were terrified, showing symptoms like trembling pupils and blood vessels constricting from fright. One of them tried to change the subject, sweating profusely and saying that the situation had been turbulent lately. The Duke asked what was happening. He told him that bandits were running rampant outside the territory's borders, and the awkward situation was forgotten. But the Duke coldly replied that it wasn't his territory, so there was no need to worry. The man agreed with him, but added that he mentioned it because of the frequent child kidnappings. The Duke imagined Leblanc being kidnapped and crying out for help. Then he commented that he couldn't let people run amok near his territory. He ordered his men to handle it, and one of them asked to what extent they should clean up. The Duke ordered him to handle it up to the border of the Roxel territory, as there was no need to deal with someone else's land. Then he thought that the Roxel territory had a beautiful garden where noble ladies often went for picnics. He imagined Leblanc growing into an elegant young lady, telling him she was leaving and then being kidnapped. He concluded that it wouldn't be bad to curry favor with the neighbors, so he ordered his men to clean up the Roxel territory as well. Then he thought that when she grew up, she might want to ride a horse, and there was a good plane for riding behind the Roxel territory. He again imagined her telling him she was leaving to go riding, and then being kidnapped. He changed his mind again and decided to clean up the plains as well. Then he thought that behind the plains was a good river for swimming. The Duke's fantasy continued, imagining that she might want to go swimming too. So he continued to expand the cleanup area until he ordered all areas within hundreds of kilometers along the Norris River to be cleared. His subordinates were stunned, understanding that this meant completely eliminating everyone in these regions. Thus, the knights who had misspoken ended up annihilating all the bandits, leaving none behind. Meanwhile, Leah found Leblanc searching for something and asked what she was doing. Leblanc was looking for the bag her grandfather had given her. Her grandfather was one of the old attendants. Leah reassured her that she had the bag and asked why she was looking for it. Leblanc hesitated to answer, appearing secretive. She then apologized to Leah, saying she couldn't tell her, which confused the maid even more. Leblanc believed this was something she had to do alone. If the temple priest came to take her, they would send her to Duke Valois' house, and from there would be no escape. She had to escape now. She knew the Empress Dowager would side with the sect if they ordered her to be taken, and there was no way the Duke would make an enemy of both the sect and the royal family just to keep her, especially since he was currently away on an inspection and wouldn't be back for 2 weeks. The sect would send her to the Valois house, where surveillance was tight and she would be unable to escape, so she had to flee during the transfer to the capital. She slipped into the kitchen, where a maid greeted her warmly. She asked the maid for water, and a lot of it. The maids happily fulfilled her request. She also had the maid give her the bag, and just like that, she had water ready for her journey. She had already hidden snacks in advance, securing a food source. Then she remembered something important. Since she would regress to a child's mental state when tired or sleepy, sweets were essential. She began stuffing candy in her bag, realizing that 1 or 2 pieces wouldn't be enough. But she quickly grew frustrated because the bag was too small, filling up after just 30 pieces of candy. She still needed to pack a map, clothes, and shoes. So she decided to pack the most important thing first: money. She had hidden the allowance she received from the attendants. Just as she was clutching the bundle of money, Leah suddenly appeared and asked what mischief she was planning. Leblanc denied it, claiming she was just organizing her bag. But Leah, completely misunderstanding the situation, sadly told her that she had to be sent away, seeing it as an opportunity for her to grow up in a better environment and receive parental love, and assured her that because she was a kind person, everyone would love her. But Leblanc, with tears in her eyes, replied that people didn't love her and she would rather fall into a sewer than go there. Leblanc knew she couldn't ask Leah for help. Leah was just a maid, and asking for her help would only put Leah's life in danger. Leah gave her some snacks, and Leblanc quietly accepted. Outside, the maids had prepared an exquisite tea party for her and told her they would read her fairy tales today. The maids tried to comfort her, some suggesting she enjoy the snacks and fairy tales, while others said they should say a proper goodbye to their own child. But they couldn't help but burst into tears and hug each other. Leblanc noticed that their sadness over her departure had been building up for a long time. They remembered holding her while giving her snacks, remembered that. The snacks were delicious, and riding horses was fun. Leblanc began to recall the happy time she had spent in the duchy and felt very sad. Compared to her previous life, this place was like heaven. Suddenly, the maids noticed she was crying and asked her why, vowing to severely punish the person who made her shed tears. Leblanc thought that once she left, she would never see Leah again, and that if the Duke were here, she would at least have a sliver of hope of not having to leave. She burst into tears, crying out that she wanted to see the Duke, never having thought she would miss that cold man. The maids hugged her for comfort, but no matter how much she cried, nothing changed. Finally, the day the priest arrived came. One of the Duke's attendants wondered why they had come so suddenly, and the priest replied that it was an order from His Holiness the Pope. Meanwhile, the maids were preparing Leblanc's luggage, suggesting she eat later and advising her take a blanket so she wouldn't get cold on the way. The priest approached her with a cold smile and asked how she had been. He asked how difficult it must have been to live in a place like this without attachments or family. She replied that it wasn't difficult, but he comforted her, saying she wouldn't have to worry anymore because they had found someone who would raise her with love. He told her that Duke Valois would be her loving father and would surely raise her with love. Leblanc scoffed internally at the idea of being raised with love, as that bastard had raised her with Cain. She knew the sect chose Valois, not for her sake, but to choose a cooperative family that would be easy to use and control after she awakened the power of the Child of Destiny. If she went to the Valois house like this, she really wouldn't be able to escape. The priest tried to drag her away by force, but she resisted desperately, screaming that it hurt. Leah tried to intervene, but the priest roughly grabbed Leblanc's hand, threatening that she would be cursed by God if she misbehaved like this. He added that bad children are punished with the cane, and since she had received the Lord's grace, she should at least show some effort and be grateful to be adopted by a prominent family like the Valois. Terrible memories flooded her mind. The smell of alcohol, the sound of a belt dragging on the floor, and the sound of a belt cutting through the air. As she relived these memories, she felt unable to breathe. The priest grabbed her face, wondering what she was doing. But a powerful voice interrupted him, ordering him to take his hands off his daughter. It was Duke Doubled who had intervened, having returned from his inspection. The Duke once again ordered the priest to let go of his daughter. The priest tried to argue that it had been agreed the child would be entrusted to Valois, but the Duke coldly replied that the matter needed to be rediscussed. The priest protested that this was absurd, and the knights prepared for a fight, but the Duke silenced him with an unquestionable tone, reminding him that he had not given him permission to speak. Leblanc looked at the Duke with tears streaming down her face. The Duke noticed the marks the priest's hand had left on Leblanc's wrist. He gripped the priest's hand tightly, and then ordered him to deliver a message. From this day on, this child will be cared for by the Doubled family. The priest screamed in pain. The Duke held Leblanc in his arms and warned the priest that if he wanted to discuss the child in the future, he had better bring at least the temple knights. The Duke commented that she looked ugly, which took her by surprise. He explained that she should at least wash her face and make herself look presentable. He then ordered his men to clean up the mess. Nos, seeing that the matter was settled, asked the priest to leave. But the priest seemed too stunned to move, so Nos kicked him out. An aide reached out his hand to Leblanc. He invited her to come to him, but she unexpectedly clung tightly to the Duke, as his arms were the only place she felt safe, and going anywhere else filled her with fear. Leah told the Duke that the child was terrified and not usually like this, and pleaded with him to allow them to stay with her for a few hours. The Duke calmly agreed. Both Leah and the aide were stunned. Leblanc felt embarrassed and apologized to the Duke, but he commented that the little one loved him very much, then asked them if it was true. The aide and Leah had no choice but to agree in confusion, then quickly left. Leblanc rejoiced internally. He had called her his daughter. She hesitantly asked if she could stay here. She assured him she would be good, not even wear shoes, and eat only a little. But the Duke interrupted her, assuring her that she would stay here. Then he added with a smile that he would adopt her. Leblanc was surprised by the Duke's reaction, as he always wore that expressionless face, but this time she found his touch unusually warm and gentle. The Duke gently patted her head and told her she could sleep now. The next day, Leblanc eagerly asked an aide to help her write something, and so she finally received the official adoption papers, bearing the name Leblanc doubled. She was ecstatic and danced with joy. The Duke was truly an amazing person. He had broken the priest's arm, yet nothing happened. The Emperor himself had stepped in to mediate with the temple, and had likely bribed them. Leblanc felt immense joy. She just needed to grow up here for 5 years, and once she turned 10, she would have better control over her adult mind. By then, she wouldn't act like a child even when hungry or sleepy, and then she could leave, just as she was planning her future, deciding to behave well and save some money for travel later. She heard the maids talking about the 2 young masters arriving soon, their carriage having already entered the castle. As a maid was helping Leblanc get dressed, one of the buttons was about to fall off. Leblanc asked her to give her the button. The maids were delighted, and Linda offered to give her heart along with it. But Leah stopped her, worried she might accidentally swallow it. Leblanc was disappointed. This button was supposed to be part of her travel fund. The maids immediately tore off the buttons from their own clothes, and Dahlia made a necklace out of them. Dahlia told Leah that the young lady couldn't eat it now. Leah agreed. Leblanc was happy. If she sold these high-quality buttons, she could get a lot of money. The maids watched from a distance as Duke Tamore arrived with members of the Senate, wondering what the reason for their visit was this time. Leblanc was curious about Taramore's identity and felt scared when she saw him. Leah ordered the curtains to be drawn so they wouldn't catch a glimpse of her, worried the Senate might decide to subject her to lineage education, just as they had done with the young lords. Besides, his gaze sent a fear deep into her soul. Leah asked if she was going to eat, and Leblanc was surprised they weren't eating here. She explained that meals were usually served in the room, and the Duke was always busy eating something simple in his office. Leblanc was curious, thinking she would find out when she got there. But Leblanc felt she had seen that old man somewhere before, and as she wondered where, she walked into the dining room. She greeted them warmly, but was surprised to find 2 other people at the table. They were the Duke's sons. The Duke called her name, then picked her up and sat her on his lap. The Duke introduced her to his 2 sons, Henry and Isaac. Leblanc noticed they had the same silver hair and blue eyes, but their personalities were complete opposites. But one thing was certain. They were miniature versions of the Duke. She had heard the eldest son was studying at an off-campus academy, so she deduced he wasn't here. Then the Duke introduced them, saying, "This is Leblanc." Henry welcomed her with a warm smile, saying he looked forward to working with her. As for Isaac, he looked taller and bigger than others his age. Leblanc felt jealous. She grew very slowly. Besides, these 2 had already climbed to the top of the pyramid, and without relying on family support. The second son, Henry, became a genius who controlled the flow of the empire's funds at a young age, and because of this, he became the head of a family branch in his early 20s. Leblanc remembered that Duke Amity disliked him, describing him as a fox who fattened himself by circumventing the law. As for the third son, Isaac, he possessed extraordinary talent in martial arts and would in the future become one of the 4 knights representing the empire. She remembered Duke Valois speaking of him with contempt, describing him as a violent bully. These distinguished Young lords would later be known as Mina's knights, Mina's brothers, or Mina's guardians, because they were like real brothers to her. For this reason, when she was accused of trying to kill Mina, she was very glad she had never clashed with them, because if they had seen her, they would have surely torn her to pieces. Even until her death, whenever the names of the doubled family sons were mentioned, her heart would clench, but she tried to calm herself. They weren't Mina's knights yet. All she had to do now was make sure not to act annoying, so she wouldn't have to tremble like before. She decided to leave a good impression. They were the young masters of this house, so she greeted them with an innocent smile. Henry smiled, which relieved her. Maybe they could get along after all, but she noticed that the way they were now was completely different from how they were in the dining room. Isaac glared at her as soon as he entered the room, while Henry was cold and distant. Suddenly, Isaac asked her in a harsh tone if she knew how to eat carrots. Confused, she gave an affirmative answer. He yelled at her, wanting to know if she was a rabbit. Leblanc thought Isaac had just called her a fool and wondered what Henry was doing, as he had been writing something on a piece of paper. She approached him and found what he had written difficult to understand, even though she had lived much longer than him. He asked if she had something to say. She told him she wanted to see the map. Isaac accused his brother of trying to embezzle money again, but Henry corrected him, saying the proper term was making a fortune. Leblanc wondered internally how a child could know about large sums of money. Henry explained that internal and external affairs were gradually becoming unstable, and in such times, one must buy iron. But Isaac interrupted him excitedly. He said he knew the answer. When war breaks out, the price of iron used to make weapons goes up. Henry considered it an immature answer. Isaac protested that it was correct, but Henry explained to him that this was a merchant's way of thinking. When war breaks out, nobles are forced to donate iron to the state, so gold is better at that time, because currency devalues during a war. Leblanc felt as if she had entered a strange world where children knew about these things. No wonder they didn't react much when she mentioned a surprise tax audit. Isaac yelled in her face, interrupting her thoughts. He threatened to kill her if she looked at him with contempt for not knowing about gold. Leblanc denied it, reminding him that he knew about iron. Isaac smiled and warned her not to be vain just because she was a child of destiny, because he was a powerful child too. Henry looked at him with contempt. Henry coldly commented that war knows no mercy or emotion, and that is the doubled way. The doubled show no mercy even to blood relatives, whether parents or children. Therefore, a person with no blood relation would be in even greater danger. Leblanc didn't understand what they were saying. She ate very little, as she felt uncomfortable eating on the Duke's lap. But she heard Henry muttering, hoping their greed wouldn't shorten their lives. Although confused, she realized she had to answer, as children who answer well are liked. So she gave an enthusiastic affirmative response. The brothers were surprised by her reaction. Isaac burst into a fit of laughter. As she left, Henry wondered about this child. Was she faking her innocence, or was there something more to her? He didn't believe that children were naive just because they were young. His younger brother was a genius who learned to read at the age of 3, and although he was a fool by his standards, even that fool could think. The Genius Academy was full of children his age who looked like snakes. Henry imagined Leblanc cleverly playing chess. A child who could report to the family about the affairs of the Pope and the temple couldn't be completely ignorant. Besides, she talked about the child of destiny and acted so cute. One of his attendants told him that she had already claimed the Duke's lap as her own territory, and if she were adopted, his position as a young master would be in jeopardy. He decided he had to keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, Isaac was angrily banging on the table, so Henry asked him what he was doing. Isaac denied that she was cute, but Henry accused him of already being in love with her, which Isaac vehemently denied. But in reality, he didn't find her cute. He just wanted to poke her chubby cheeks. Leblanc tried to scream, but couldn't do it properly, which frustrated her. Isaac was determined not to be fooled by her cute, adult-like behavior, and decided in his heart to torment her. Later, she found herself face to face with him, confused as to why he was doing this. Silence and hesitation hung in the air, and Leblanc felt she had to do something to break the awkward situation. So she gathered her courage and handed him her money pouch, trying to break the ice. But he completely misunderstood her, angrily warning her not to covet a position that wasn't hers and threatening her. Henry observed the situation from a distance, curious about what the child was doing. Henry realized that Isaac was making a fatal mistake, because the moment he threatened her, he was destined to be the loser. Suddenly, Isaac took out a piece of bread and announced that he was going to do something very terrible, which was that he was going to eat all the bread himself. In front of her, Henry looked at them with contempt, wondering if they were fools. Leblanc reacted dramatically to this, accusing him of being cruel for eating all the bread himself, without sharing any with her. But in reality, she was thinking that if she watched him eat while she was hungry, she might not be able to think like an adult and might pull his hair, and if she did that, she would surely be kicked out. She decided not to be greedy, and Isaac praised her, thinking she was a good girl, which surprised her. But she politely asked him to share some bread with her. He asked in surprise if she wanted some, and she nodded. So he replied that he couldn't refuse and would give her half. Leblanc felt immense happiness as she tasted the bread, as it tasted exceptionally sweet and delicious, making her want to dance. Isaac watched her enjoy the food, and when he took a bite himself, he found that it did taste very good, especially since he had chosen it at random. Just then, Leah came in, which made Leblanc panic. She remembered that Leah had promised her strawberries today and had told her not to eat any snacks. To defend herself, she shifted the blame to Isaac, claiming he had given it to her. Isaac was surprised and confused, but he admitted that he had indeed given it to her. Leah smiled and said that since they were getting along so well, she wouldn't pursue the matter. Leblanc felt relieved. Then Leah told her she had come to take her for a nap. Leblanc waved goodbye to Isaac as she left. Isaac was left behind, trying to convince himself that she wasn't cute at all. As Leah placed her in bed, she commented that they seemed to be getting along well in the dining room. Leah told Leblanc she knew the young masters would love her because she was so kind. How could they not love her? Leblanc thought to herself that this was not the case. Henry and Isaac did not love her. Nevertheless, she couldn't just sit back and do nothing, as she had to live here until she could seek asylum. So she concluded that if she saw them often, they would eventually get used to her. She decided to win them over. The next morning, she wondered if Henry and Isaac would come for lunch today, but she knew they were very busy people. They were always training and attending endless meetings, so she couldn't find an opportunity to talk to them alone. Therefore, today's lunch was her only chance. She decided to spontaneously invite them to play together right after they finished eating. She slipped into the dining room like a secret agent and found them all gathered together. Nos noticed her and asked if she was the little lady. Leblanc felt nervous, not knowing how to enter. Nos welcomed her, saying she must have come because she missed his master, but she denied this in her heart. The Duke invited her over, so she responded happily and sat on his lap. The servants were stunned by this scene. As the rumors were true, she sat on the Duke's lap very naturally. They praised her kindness, saying she wasn't a picky eater and even liked peppers and carrots, which she actually hated. One of them began to boast about how polite she was. Leblanc greeted those present. They burst into a fit of laughter, which embarrassed her. But her targets for the day, Henry and Isaac, looked at the aides with confusion. She felt that things were not going according to plan. Just then, an old man walked in, apologizing for being late. Leblanc recognized him. He was the same man she had seen last time. He sat near the Duke, so she wondered if he was a high-ranking attendant and felt she had seen him somewhere before. Suddenly, she remembered that he might be the witness the Duke had hidden with his own hands. This man had brought danger upon himself and had abused a child right under the guardian's nose. No wonder that child hunted him down after growing up. He was a sadist. Leblanc had heard the servants talking and thought that Count Tamore had no children, so she was confused about who he had actually abused. The only children Tamore had access to were Henry and Isaac, and someone who would in the future become powerful enough to force an elder of the doubled family into hiding. But she dismissed the idea, as abusing a doubled son was simply insane. It was common sense. But crazy things were always happening. She remembered a conversation she had heard in her previous life, where Duke Amity's wife was shocked to learn that the Count's daughter had been beaten by her teacher. The Duke confirmed it to her, saying it was a terrible thing. The Duchess said that this kind of thing also happened in her old world, where nannies abused the children they cared for, and kindergarten teachers hit children in front of the whole class. So Leblanc couldn't be 100% sure that Tamore wasn't that kind of pervert. If he really did abuse one of them, which one was it? Because Duke Amity's butler sounded as if there was only one victim. She felt that Henry was very smart and wouldn't be an easy target. As for Isaac, he seemed very aggressive. Could he have really endured abuse until he grew up? News. interrupted her thoughts by asking if she disliked the food, which she quickly denied. Although she was jumping to conclusions, she felt it was necessary to verify this matter. She then asked Nos to take her to the training grounds, where she found the brothers training. The instructor asked Nos what he was doing there, and Nos told him that Leblanc wanted to see the training grounds, so the instructor said he had a report to submit anyway. The brothers were surprised to see her, and Isaac asked what she was doing there. She told him she wanted to play with them. He replied mockingly, asking if she had come all this way just to see him. What a hassle. But she was carefully examining his body and found no bruises or marks on his neck, ankles, or under his sleeves. She couldn't tell if the slight bruises were from training or from being hit. She noticed that Henry also had scratches, possibly injured during training. She decided to get a closer look, but suddenly tripped. Henry caught her before she fell. She thanked him, and he replied not to mind it. Although he was smiling, his eyes were telling her to stay away. Despite this, she didn't think he was a bad boy. He was cold, but not overly hostile. Isaac interrupted the scene, saying she couldn't even walk properly, calling her a fool while striking the ground hard. Leblanc understood this feeling, knowing how terrifying an adult's hand could be. Just then, Tamore appeared, commenting on the three of them being together. He approached Leblanc, saying that a child's hand is really soft. Then, he told her that she was very obedient, and if she continued to be so, there would be no need for punishment. Leblanc realized that this was the man she had seen in her first life. She remembered how he had screamed, wondering why they didn't send him abroad, and how he was afraid that if he kept silent, that man would kill him. She also remembered Duke Amity telling him that the responsibility was on him because he had abused a child and offering him help to escape, which he did. Tamore was the one tutoring the young lords. We tried to take them to study. Leblanc screamed in her heart that this must not happen. She shouted her objection out loud. North noticed her scream and quickly walked towards her. But Leblanc thought cleverly. Why would he think she brought her aide North to the training ground? It was because he was the Duke's closest aide, someone who could stand against those high-ranking figures. Tamore claimed he had some free time and came to greet his outstanding students. But in reality, he had other plans. He commented that it would be better to postpone the greetings to another time, and then left. One of the aides commented that Tamore would be taking over the young lord's education again this time, and it must be the influence of the Senate. As the aides talked, Leblanc thought that she must now find the child who was being abused by Tamore. She realized there was no need to search around, because fear always reveals itself. That person was Henry. On the training ground, the match resumed. Leblanc pondered what to do now. She thought about telling the Duke, but she had no evidence. He could simply claim any bruises or wounds occurred during training. If she spoke up without evidence, she would look like a weirdo. It would be better for Henry to speak up himself. But he hadn't spoken up until now, which meant he was hiding it. She wondered, why would someone as smart as Henry hide something like this? Suddenly, she noticed something strange. Isaac was using aura, a magic that only the elite among the Knights Templar could use. Being able to use magic at this age, his opponent immediately surrendered. But Isaac coldly replied that there was no such thing as surrender, and if you lose in a conflict, you die. The person screamed in terror after managing to dodge the attack at the last moment. Isaac lunged fiercely at his opponent, determined to end the fight this time. Leblanc watched this scene, her heart filled with fear, while Isaac was still immersed in the glow of his power. From Isaac's perspective, who had never expected such a reaction from her, the ecstasy of battle turned into shock. He asked himself in surprise, did he look that scary? As for Leblanc, she decided at that moment, while taking notes, that it would be best not to provoke Isaac either. Meanwhile, his opponent was jokingly pleading for him to spare him, arguing that he had a family waiting for him at home. But Isaac looked at him with obvious boredom in his eyes. It had all become tedious for him. The man felt immense relief and repeatedly thanked him for his mercy. Leblanc was also relieved that things had ended there. Henry sighed, then called his next opponent, announcing it was his turn. Leblanc wondered about Henry's true strength, especially since she remembered how he was beaten by an old man like Tamore. As the match resumed, he was surrounded by a powerful blue aura, calmly preparing himself. While Leblanc was still thinking he wasn't that strong, Henry launched a sweeping attack that made his opponent scream in pain. The match was immediately declared over, with young Lord Henry achieving an overwhelming victory. Leblanc was utterly shocked, realizing that Henry was incredibly strong. Her confusion grew. If he was so strong, why did he let Tamore hit him? In another training session, a veteran asked Henry to continue, and Henry was clearly taking a beating. Leblanc realized that if he fought seriously, Tamore would have been long dead, because even to her untrained eye, his last opponent was much stronger than this veteran. She couldn't understand what was happening, and confusion enveloped her. Those present began to whisper, expecting the young lord to be lenient with him because he was a veteran, as it was inconceivable for him to be defeated so easily. Leblanc thought about this possibility, but she wasn't entirely convinced. Suddenly, the soldier shouted in anger, warning Henry not to look down on him, and charged at him forcefully. Henry barely dodged the blow after sustaining a minor injury, a look of shock on his face. Henry continued to fend off the attacks, and a look of tension appeared on his face as the soldier managed to push him back and force him to his knees. Leblanc's eyes widened in horror, realizing he was about to get hurt. So she suddenly rushed in, screaming for him to stop. Henry looked on in surprise as Leblanc stood before him, protecting him. Leblanc stood between them, shouting at the soldier not to hit Henry. But he tried to argue that it was just training. She interrupted him with passion and anger, stressing that what he was doing wasn't training, but beating Henry out of anger. The veteran's movement stopped, and he looked shocked. He realized inwardly that her words were true, as an attack filled with anger was not training, but pure violence. The soldier confusedly apologized to the young lord, while Henry watched him with a cold and expressionless gaze. Henry firmly interrupted the situation, declared it was over, and turned to leave, while Leblanc watched him exit the training ground. Henry stopped after a few steps, a complex expression on his face. Leblanc anxiously ran towards him, asking if he was hurt. She began to circle him in a panic, trying to check his body for injuries. Henry asked in surprise what she was doing, and she insisted in reply that she had to apply medicine to him because he was injured. She thought he might be afraid of the doctor, since he was still a child after all. She tried to reassure him, telling him the doctor was a kind person and there was no need to be afraid. But Henry angrily interrupted her, strongly denying that he was afraid of the doctor and shouting that he hated old men. His words shocked Leblanc. As the words Henry and old men connected her mind, she began to recall certain fragments of memory, and the pieces of the puzzle started to intertwine. Her memory went back to a conversation she had heard about the hatred some people had for the Doubled family. Specifically, the former Duke, Cain Doubled, who was described as a monster. He was a demon who killed his second son, Chris, in front of his grandson. Simply because Chris walked with a limp, he believed a disabled child was useless. Here, Leblanc realized the terrible truth. What if the grandson who witnessed that scene was Henry himself? It would be very natural for him to develop a psychological trauma towards old men. No matter how smart he was just a child at the time. He then found his trauma towards old men to be a weakness, and became obsessed with the idea that he would be killed if he had any flaws. That old man had sensed Henry's psychological trauma. This was why Henry hid the Duke's abuse of him, because if he reported Tamore, his trauma would be exposed to everyone. A strong anger towards that despicable old man welled up in her, but she struggled to calm herself down. She realized the smartest thing to do was to remain silent, because Tamore was a member of the Doubled Senate, and his words carried more credibility than hers. And if she spoke up, Henry wouldn't confess, and in the end, she would look like a strange child. In the worst-case scenario, she could be abandoned. But she couldn't ignore this matter. She realized this was the worst part of being in a child's body. Her conscience wouldn't let her stand by, so she walked towards Henry and gently patted his head. He looked at her in surprise, asking what she was doing. She smiled and told him that she would protect him. Henry looked at her in surprise. Then Leblanc thought to herself, she had no choice but to protect him. But in exchange for this protection, all he had to do was not bother her during her stay with them. A sly smile appeared on Leblanc's face. She decided to show him the wisdom of her fourth life and teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. Leblanc and Leah were sitting in a field full of purple flowers. When Leah asked if she loved her, Leblanc naively replied that they were beautiful. Leblanc looked at Leah's watch and realized it was almost 4 p.m. Leblanc realized that the person she was waiting for would arrive soon. Then she pretended to feel cold, so Leah suggested they go back to the palace. But Leblanc refused, announcing she was going to make a flower crown for Leah. A feeling of happiness and warmth filled Leah's heart because of this innocent gesture. But in Leblanc's heart, she was planning something else, as she hoped to be able to shake off Leah. She looked towards the gate, where she saw the guards ensuring her safety, so she confirmed that her plan was proceeding as scheduled. Leah offered to go get her a coat and a blanket to keep warm, and Leblanc immediately agreed. As Leah walked back to the castle, Leblanc was left alone in the garden. After deciding to punish Tamore for Henry's sake, she smiled slyly. She had to start with the first step. She recalled yesterday when North found her in front of the Duke's office and asked her why she was there. She replied with a bright smile that she wanted to see the Duke. The aide took her into the office and announced the child's arrival to the Duke. The Duke held her, placed her on his lap, and asked what she intended to do here, jokingly asking if she loved him that much, to which she confirmed. But her real goal was to gather information. She listened to the Duke's conversation with his aide, where the Duke inquired about the progress of the proposal to establish a new advisory body. Leblanc realized that if she stayed by the Duke's side, she could obtain information about Tamore. The Duke asked if there were any vacancies among the elders, and the aide replied that they were monitoring each other, especially Lord Tamore and Lord Messing. Upon hearing Taramore's name, Leblanc's eyes lit up. North explained that the two men had been sworn enemies for some time, and the matter would escalate into a silent var. Leblanc was delighted to realize that Tamore had an enemy. If things went well, she wouldn't even need to intervene personally. She returned to reality and saw a man walking towards her, and she realized with excitement that he had arrived. He came from an ancient family that had served the great elders of Doubled for generations. He was the head of the Messing family, Viscount Carr Messing. Messing was surprised to see the famous child of fate in this place. He approached her and asked what she was doing in such cold weather. This was the very question she had been eagerly waiting for. She replied with a mischievous smile that she was waiting for Grandpa Terra. Messing was surprised by the name and asked if she meant Tamore, to which she replied with affirmation and enthusiasm, and added that Leblanc, Henry, and Isaac would be taking lessons together. Messing laughed out loud mockingly, wondering who could learn anything from someone like Tamore, describing his family as weak and him as an ignorant old man. Leblanc shook her head insistently, rejecting his words, emphasizing that her grandpa was the best. Then she added with childlike enthusiasm, to further stir the pot, that he said he would soon be wearing a wonderful robe. That robe was the symbol of a doubled elder, a deep purple robe. That was the very robe Messing dreamed of. Messing was shocked and asked if Tamore had really said that, and Leblanc confidently replied, confirming she had heard it with her own ears. Messing flew into a rage, refusing to believe such nonsense, believing the position was his by right. Leblanc continued to weave her plan with feigned innocence, explaining that Tamore had told her everything was already decided, and he would give the robe to her grandpa. Messing began to realize the seriousness of the situation, and wondered in panic if the head of the Senate was involved in this. Then Leblanc delivered the final blow, claiming that Tamore had invited her to watch the fool who thought the robe was his shed. Tears of blood. With a bright and innocent smile, she invited him to watch along. Messing was completely flustered and began to stammer, trying to make an excuse to leave, claiming he had some matters he had to attend to. As he hurried away, Leblanc waved at him enthusiastically to encourage him, while hoping in her heart that he would go all out against Tamore. Elsewhere, the Senate was in a state of turmoil because the Duke had decided to establish a new advisory body, which would completely marginalize their role. Someone wondered if the head of the Senate, Jean-Marc Noinac, would sit idly by, but the Senate head calmly replied that his master's will was firm. He added, holding his wine glass, that a servant has no choice but to obey his master's orders. His words caused confusion among those present, so he explained his true meaning, announcing that they must wait for a new master, a master who shared their views. Then he turned to Tamore, emphasizing that the young lords were the future of Doubled and must be taught with the utmost sincerity. But his gaze carried a deeper meaning, as he meant to teach them in a way that suited their own interests. Tamore replied to him with a sly smile, assuring him there was no need to worry, as all preparations were complete. Meanwhile, Messing observed the situation from a distance, his hands clenched in anger. Tamore was receiving congratulations from some nobles on obtaining the elder's robe and feigned modesty, but in his heart he felt a sense of triumphant joy. The opportunity he had long awaited had finally arrived. He had always felt resentful because his family was always overlooked while the young took all the opportunities. But this time was different, as he had gained the personal attention of the Senate head. His plan was simple. It was easy to train young children to suit his goals, as Henry couldn't resist him due to his psychological trauma, and Isaac could be controlled through psychological pressure. Finally, the day he would become one of the elders had arrived. Another person approached him, pretending to congratulate him and asking him to remember him after becoming an elder, to which Tamore agreed, while Messing scoffed at him. He saw him selling out his own family for a dream that had not yet been realized. The other person nervously replied that, according to seniority, the turn should belong to Tamore. Messing mockingly interrupted him, wondering if this so-called seniority was established during his time as a servant in his own house. A look of shock appeared on Tamore's face, while the people at the scene began to whisper, condemning Messing's disrespect towards someone older than him. But Messing continued his attack, arguing that Tamore couldn't be blamed, as he still carried the old habits from when he was just his servant. Then he approached him and whispered in his ear in a threatening tone, expressing his surprise that someone who barely managed to serve him as a servant ended up becoming the young lord's teacher. What a world we live in. He continued to approach him, whispering again and wondering how much he knew about his weaknesses. Tamore froze on the spot, enveloped by fear. Messing ended his speech with a piece of poisoned advice, warning him not to covet a position that was beyond his true station. Anger burned in Tamore's chest, and he swore to himself that he would tear him apart and kill him. Meanwhile, Leblanc observed the scene from a distance and decided to see how far things would go. A fierce conflict broke out between the followers of Tamore and Messing, with Messing's team insisting that they could not entrust the future of Doubled to a teacher of questionable identity and demanding a reconsideration of the appointment. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Messing laughed to himself, as expected of someone who became a candidate for elder at such a young age. He really knew how to play dirty games. He was manipulating public opinion, claiming that the education of the main family had always been entrusted to families that had served for more than 5 generations. He was also using school and regional connections. If his late father knew that someone like Tamore would become an elder, he would jump out of his grave. He offered another argument, claiming that since Tamore took over, young Lord Isaac's grades had dropped by 1.2, and based on this, Tamore was absolutely unacceptable. Those present began to be persuaded, thinking that Duke Messing would be a much better choice. Leblanc felt very satisfied. She was glad to have instigated this fight, as now all eyes were on Tamore, with Messing desperately trying to exploit any weakness. Unless Tamore was a fool, he would not be able to get close to Henry. She hoped the two would clash and end up in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The maids noticed her good mood and wondered about the reason. Saiso claimed the reason was because she knew she had brought her a new rocking horse. But another interrupted her, emphasizing that the reason was the 3,000-piece puzzle she had brought, while Saiso insisted that a child would prefer a rocking horse. So they decided to compete, with one of them vowing to gouge out her own eyes to play with if she lost. While the maids argued, Leblanc pretended to enjoy her time. Later she saw Isaac, who asked her if she was a normal child. She approached him and asked where he was going, and he replied that he was heading to the training ground. She asked if he was going there too, and he replied with a proud smile, explaining that his older brother was retaking an exam, but he had already gotten everything right, so he finished quickly. Leblanc was very surprised, as she remembered what the servants in her previous life used to say. They often said that Isaac was certainly excellent, but when it came to intelligence, Henry was far superior. Suddenly, she rushed to where Henry was and heard the maid screams. As they called out to her, she immediately realized the truth. It was impossible for Henry to fail a test that Isaac had passed. They had deliberately left Henry behind, and it was obvious who the culprit was. She ran quickly while screaming, only to find Tamore scolding and kneeling Henry. Leblanc realized her initial assumption was wrong. She thought they were using violence as a means of brainwashing and controlling Henry, but the truth was much uglier. At that moment, Tamore approached her with a cold smile, asking in a mocking tone what she was doing here during class time. Leblanc looked at him with contempt and coldly replied that it was not class time and that Henry had been hit. Tamore laughed, thinking what she said was dangerous, and mockingly wondered how he would dare to hit a young lord. But Leblanc firmly confronted him, stressing that she had witnessed everything with her own eyes. Tamore tried to deny the matter, claiming he had not done such a thing, but then added in a sinister tone that if something similar had happened, it was only loving discipline. Leblanc then realized his sick reality. He enjoyed venting his inferiority complex as a commoner on a noble child. When he asked her not to interrupt the lesson, Leblanc quickly grabbed a pen from the table and without hesitation pierced his hand. He screamed in pain and blood splattered everywhere. Tamore clutched his hand and screamed in her face, wondering about her audacity, how she dared to do that. Leblanc stood defiantly before him, with Henry right beside her. She countered his mockery with even harsher mockery, wondering what he was thinking, then added that she was caressing him with love and called him a scoundrel. Henry looked at her with extreme shock and surprise. Henry couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then LeBlanc turned to Henry and extended her hand to him, telling him to go. Henry froze on the spot, confusedly wondering about the true identity of this child. He eventually took her hand and followed her out of the room. Tamore was left alone in pain and anger. LeBlanc turned to him and whispered with a cold smile for him to expect what was coming. Then she added that the Duke would soon know about his abuse of Henry. Darkness clouded Tamore's face as he contemplated revenge. As she led Henry, she thought they should see a doctor. But Henry shook off her hand, asking in a panic if she was crazy, and wasn't she afraid? He warned her that what she had done would have terrible consequences, that Lord Tamore was an evil man. But she calmly and confidently replied that she was not afraid of him, because she knew what was more painful than physical violence. That was the wound left in Henry's heart. She continued, emphasizing that she was not afraid of the bad man who hit Henry, because psychological pain is much deeper than the pain in an arm or a fever that lasts all night. Because the constant fear of, what if I get hit again tomorrow, is what truly hurts. She had experienced this terrible experience herself, which is why she couldn't ignore this matter. Then she kindly suggested that if he didn't like the doctor, they could go to the princess in his place. Henry tried to evade by saying things were fine, but she insisted. If a child is in pain, it is not allowed. He forcefully shook off her hand again, telling her not to interfere in his affairs, and warned her not to tell anyone what happened today. Henry stood before her for a moment, then turned and left, still in a state of shock. As for Tamore, he left the place in a rage, cursing the damn girl who had ruined everything. He tried to justify his actions by claiming he was only gently disciplining Henry, but he couldn't stop thinking about the child, wondering how a 4-year-old could speak like that. Her gaze carried a sense of dominance and a power that was unbecoming of a child. In his imagination, she had transformed from the child of fate into a true demon. He concluded that the temple must have sent them a devil, as such a cunning child could not be the true child of fate. Despite this, he refused to surrender, defiantly questioning how he could lose to her. To take preemptive action, he went straight to the Duke of Doublet's office and knocked on the door to announce his arrival. However, he was taken aback by the Duke's angry reaction. The Duke indignantly demanded to know how Lord Tamore could do such a thing. Panic gripped Tamore's heart, as he believed someone had already informed the Duke that he had attacked Henry. Tamore tried to salvage the situation, pleading with the Duke to hear him out first, and wondered aloud what reason could possibly drive him to do such a thing. Those present cast sharp glances at him from the Duke's expression. Tamore realized he had indeed heard something. He then shifted the blame onto the child, claiming it was all her scheme and that he would never dare to do such a thing to the young master. But the Duke coldly interrupted him, asking which young master he was referring to. North was confused by Tamore's words. Tamore continued his defense, claiming he was the victim in this situation, but he felt the atmosphere become unusually tense. Then the painful truth dawned on him. He had fallen into the trap of that cunning little brat. He had thought she had reported Henry's situation to the Duke. Her threat to tell the Duke was merely bait. The purpose was to make him panic and act suspiciously. All his plans crumbled as he realized the girl had no intention of informing the Duke from the beginning. After all, how could she? She had only been here for a few months and was sent by the temple, their sworn enemy. In contrast, he was a servant who had served the Doubled family for a lifetime. Obviously, he should enjoy more trust. Furthermore, Henry wouldn't speak up because of his psychological trauma, and no one would believe her even if she confessed. She had succeeded in making him look suspicious and drawing unnecessary attention to him. North interrupted him, saying they were originally discussing how he had yelled at a child over a small mistake, but it seemed things were not that simple. Another person added that he wouldn't have acted so suspiciously without an underlying reason. Tamore finally realized he had been played. North declared the matter extremely suspicious, questioning how Tamore dared to make up such an excuse. He demanded an investigation, asserting that the task of teaching the young masters could not be entrusted to him until his innocence was proven. Tamore looked to the Duke for help, but only saw a cold gaze. Tamore left the Duke's office in a rage, cursing his luck. After everything was going so well, it had all been turned upside down. He suddenly turned to find Leblanc standing behind him, and his anger erupted as he pointed at her and screamed. But Leblanc responded to his anger with a sly smile, further infuriating him, and he called her a damn brat. He threatened that he would not remain silent about what she had done, but she looked at him with feigned innocence, asking what exactly he could do. He continued his threats, declaring he would expose her true identity to everyone, that she was nothing but a demon sent by the temple. However, she responded in a deliberately childish tone. With a cunning smile, she called him a stupid grandpa and pointed out that he had admitted with his own mouth that he was hiding something, wondering who would believe him now that he had exposed himself. At that moment, Tamore realized that due to his reckless actions, he had lost the trust of the Duke and the Senate. Even if he tried to expose her truth, he would be dismissed as a liar. He completely lost his sanity, lunging at her and shouting insults. But she let him grab her hand with a playful smile, mockingly asking how he knew her nickname was Bad Woman. Then, her expression shifted to a threatening glare, making it clear that she would bite if provoked. This left Tamore in a state of deep shock and fear. She glared sharply at his hand, ordering him to let go and threatening that she might break his other hand as well. She concluded that he had underestimated her because she was just a child. As he stared at her, utterly defeated, her memory drifted back to her past life when she was just a beggar wandering the back alleys. Because of this, the threats of a pampered nobleman like him couldn't faze her at all. A commotion even greater than before erupted, with people raising their voices to demand Tamore's suspension. A senator questioned the chairman of the Senate, ordering him to leave immediately. An official decision was announced to suspend Austin Tamore pending the completion of an investigation, forcing him to bow his head in shame. With this decision, the path for Lord Messing to become the new senator seemed to have been paved, and things finally began to fall into place. Meanwhile, Messing noticed the young lady Leblanc. He approached her with a brilliant smile, asking if she needed anything. She gave an affirmative reply, but wondered to herself why he was so happy to see her. He spoke to her very kindly, assuring her that if anything was troubling her, she should tell him immediately. This only added to her confusion about his strange behavior. He then told her that he owed her a favor, thinking to himself that she probably didn't understand the weight of his words. She immediately realized that he thought she had helped him and that she had unexpectedly won his favor. She decided to take advantage of the situation and resolved to make him a permanent ally, especially after hearing from the maids that Lord Messing had scolded that bad grandpa. Lord Messing enthusiastically confirmed that he had sternly reprimanded the man and that he wouldn't dare show his face there again. Leblanc clapped her hands in awe with childlike joy, which charmed Lord Messing, who thought to himself how adorable she was. She knew this was the social finesse of someone who had lived 4 lives, and she resolved to become a fine adult like Lord Messing. As his subordinates looked at her with admiration, Messing turned to leave, but before going, he told her to come to him if she needed anything. Leblanc was filled with a sense of happiness, a victorious smile on her face. She felt her bond with Messing had strengthened. He and his entourage bid her farewell, apologizing that they had a meeting to attend. After they left, she decided it was time to check on Henry. She cautiously approached his room, worried he might get angry if she disturbed him again, so she decided to just take a peek. But just as she pushed the door open, someone grabbed her from behind, asking what she was doing and scaring her into a scream. It was Henry and Isaac. Isaac mockingly asked if she was spying on them. She quickly denied it, claiming she was just looking. Isaac felt there was no difference between the two. Leblanc was conflicted. She told Henry she had come to see him, and he might get angry again, but at the same time, she couldn't help but come. She remembered overhearing the maids say that Tamore would be coming to the castle today for the investigation. Although the young masters denied being hurt, the maids worried about what could stop a madman from striking again. Therefore, she was determined not to let him get near Henry again. But Isaac interrupted her thoughts, mockingly concluding that she had come because of the circulating rumors. She realized Isaac wasn't stupid. If she hadn't come to see him, it was natural to assume She had come for Henry. However, it completely took her by surprise when he thought she had come because she heard there was cake today. Leblanc was stunned, wondering if Isaac was a fool after all. Isaac continued to proudly assure her that there was no need to rush, as there was plenty of cake. In that moment, Leblanc completely forgot about Henry. All she could think about was cake, as she was starving from thinking too much like an adult recently. Isaac pretended to be nonchalant, claiming he hadn't specifically saved cake for her, while Leblanc insisted that he had. He then tried to argue that he didn't like sweets, and Leblanc enthusiastically agreed. But she suddenly cut him off, reminding him that he had enjoyed sugar cookies just yesterday, which left Isaac embarrassed. Seeing that Henry didn't seem to be in pain and had no lasting effects, Leblanc felt relieved. The two brothers turned to get the cake, and Leblanc watched them before sitting down to enjoy the delicious piece of cake. Isaac watched her with a smile and asked if it was really that good. Leblanc thanked him gratefully, her eyes shimmering with tears of happiness. The taste reminded her of her miserable life as a beggar, when eating something like this might have given her a heart attack. She was surprised when Isaac asked if she wanted more tomorrow morning. She happily replied that he was the best. He then promised to share a portion of his dinner with her as well, which made her even more excited, praising him as amazing. He didn't stop there, promising to give her more the next day. She looked at him with deep gratitude, and in her eyes, it was as if he was glowing. Henry commented that it was no big deal, while Leblanc thought to herself that anyone who gave her cake was a good person. Isaac and Henry continued to watch Leblanc enjoy the cake with delight. However, this peaceful moment was soon interrupted by the arrival of the maids. They hid behind the door, giggling softly. Later, while the brothers were studying, Henry was focused on his writing, while Leblanc was fighting off sleepiness. Henry noticed her fatigue and suggested she go to sleep. But Leblanc, watching from a distance, refused the idea. She knew Tamore could show up at any moment, and she had to protect Henry. Despite her heavy eyelids, she decided to go wash her face to wake herself up. She then went over to Isaac and whispered something in his ear, and he agreed to her request. Leblanc sighed wearily, thinking like an adult all day had indeed exhausted her, and staying up late would only make it worse. She continued down the dark hallway, remembering the washroom was in that direction. But suddenly, a strong hand grabbed her from behind, and a malicious voice asked if she really thought he would only target Henry. It was Tamore. He tried to drag her away roughly, but she resisted. She screamed at him that she was different from Henry. She wasn't trained, and any marks of force he left on her would be discovered immediately. But he scoffed at her threat, saying he didn't need to use his hands to torture someone. He then pulled out a blue gem. It was a blue spinel, a special stone used specifically for extracting divine power and crafting holy artifacts. The darker the color, the more energy it could draw. While considered a precious gem on the market, for the person whose power was being extracted, it was a nightmare. If divine power was drawn to its limit, the result was either death or madness. Fear enveloped her. In that moment, she would rather die and be reincarnated than go mad. As for Tamore, he was in a state of frenzy. He had lost his position as a teacher and had been abandoned by the chairman. It was all because of her. She realized he had completely lost his mind and tried to back away, threatening to scream. But he mocked her, challenging her to scream and questioning whether rescue would arrive first or if her divine power would be drained first. Just as he was about to touch her with the stone, a powerful voice commanded him to let her go. It was Henry who intervened, striking Tamore's hand forcefully. Leblanc was shocked. She knew Henry suffered from psychological trauma and didn't expect him to stand up to Tamore. Henry grabbed Tamore's arm, but the latter shoved him away roughly. He then grabbed his clothes, calling him trash. Leblanc suddenly rushed forward to protect him, screaming at Tamore not to touch Henry. Suddenly, the door to the room shattered. Duke doubled appeared, surrounded by an aura of power and rage. Tamore panicked, wondering how the Duke got there. Leblanc scoffed at him internally, thinking did he really believe she would wander around alone after provoking him? She had already sent Isaac to get the Duke. She had stayed up this late, not just to protect Henry. She had anticipated he would come for her late at night. Tamore was finished. Those present watched in shock, unable to believe what was happening. Tamore trembled with rage, while Leblanc tried to protect Henry, who had fallen to the ground behind her. Tamore tried to explain the situation to the Duke, but his words were stuttered and incoherent. The Duke unleashed his power, causing Tamore to scream in pain and fear. Meanwhile, Messing cursed inwardly. He realized that a subordinate of the Senate had abused a direct heir of the family, a major incident that could lead to the downfall of the entire Senate. But he knew they wouldn't give up easily. In a worst-case scenario, a civil war could break out. The Duke called Henry's name, and Henry looked at him nervously. He then demanded that he tell him what happened in his own words. Henry tried to deflect, claiming it was nothing worth mentioning. But the Duke cut him off sternly, asserting that the right to judge this matter belonged to him alone. Tamore flew into a rage, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding. He tried to explain, but the Duke suddenly attacked him again with magical power, making him scream in agony. Leblanc herself was shocked, realizing it was a silent magic incantation. She wondered if such a thing was even possible. She looked at the Duke with admiration, realizing that what he had done was truly amazing. Henry dismissed the matter as trivial, but the Duke angrily questioned him. How could he describe violence as trivial? Henry explained to the Duke that he had planned to observe Tamore's absurd behavior for a while longer. The Duke concluded that Henry meant to say that once he became a member of the Senate, he would exploit Tamore's weakness. He then added in a cold tone that he hated liars, especially when the liar was his own son. He called Henry's name again, looking extremely angry. But Leblanc intervened, hugging the Duke tightly and shouting for him not to do it. Everyone stared at her in shock. Leblanc clung to the Duke's leg and pleaded, saying that Henry was scared, that the Duke was frightening him, and that she was scared too. She then thought to herself that she must be crazy to cling to a monster who could use magic without chanting. Climbing into a lion's mouth probably wasn't this scary. Though she was trembling with fear, she held her ground for Henry's sake, as he was still just a young child after all. Henry started to run away. Leblanc anxiously called his name and chased after him, but he suddenly stopped and screamed at her to stay away from him. She tried to soothe him, assuring him that he was not a defective product. She added that she was also afraid of sharp things and frogs, and that being afraid wasn't a defect. Leblanc grabbed Henry's arm, promising to protect him. He looked at her, seemingly moved by her words for a moment, but his cold gaze quickly returned as he remembered someone saying the doubled family had no need for defective products. She tried to take him to the Duke, but he roughly pushed her hand away, screaming at her and asking who had asked her to do this. He continued to shout, asking who she thought she was to interfere in his business, and did she really think they were real siblings just because she was adopted? He then said some harsh words, claiming that no one would treat an orphan with no blood ties as family. Finally, he ordered her to get out of his sight. His words left Leblanc devastated, and she stood there alone as he walked away.